8774. All right, we are officially going to get this show on the road. So, ladies and gentlemen, all 10 of you who are in there in the chat room with us, however many may be out there watching, and all the folks at home who may be catching us on the YouTube stream, we will now make this official. So, everybody stand by. Here we go. Ladies and gents, 2018 wrap-up show begins now.
We raise a glass to the past and the ladies cross the ages, fallen fathers from the motherland whose lives are on the pages. And the father said it best when he told us all the world's a stage. So fellas, grab a glass and lift your spirits to the seventh age.
Welcome, one and all around the globe. It is the Seven Ages Audio Journal, and we are live tonight as we do our 2018 wrap-up program right here, live from the Crosstime Pub. Of course, giving ourselves away a little bit because, of course, the pub exists in numerous locations. Joining me tonight, live via Charleston, South Carolina, my good friend, my pal, archaeologist extraordinaire, environmental scientist, and all-around good guy, Mr. Jason Pentrail. How are you, sir?
Hey, good evening. And yeah, that's right. I'm coming from Studio B, a little bit further south than usual, but still home nonetheless.
That's right. Good to have you here. And then, of course, down there in musky, mossy Savannah, my good pal, geologist extraordinaire, Mr. James Waldo. How are you, my friend?
Good evening, my friends. Yeah, everything's great here. You know, honestly, this is my first live show that I've ever done in any context, and I'm not even nervous at all. So that tells you what I know.
That's right. Well, you guys are seasoned professionals at this point. So glad as always to be able to be here with you. There are a lot of ways that folks listening at home can tune in and join the program. We'll get to those in just a moment. But first, I think there's no better way I could imagine to kick things off tonight than getting right to one of our special guests who's going to join us for the program, the official program now that we are live. And that is, of course, the one and only Mr. Lash LaRue, my brother down there in the bayou. How are you?
Ho, 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 and a Merry Christmas, gentlemen.
Lash, brother, it's so good to hear your voice as always, my man.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to you,
brother.
man.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah. What's going on down there in the LaRue Bayou? Is Christmas being good to you so far?
It is, man, but it is so busy, but busy in a good way. There's a million things going on, but I finally have a little afternoon and evening, if you will, where I can sit back. I have my Bigfoot slippers on. I have my feet propped up, and I'm just enjoying a little fellowship with my brothers.
That's good. That's what we like. Well, you know, we were able to enjoy some fellowship with you earlier this year. You are a wonderful host, and Jason and James and I think we did a little caving with you. We went and did some Egyptological explorations, and we studied some mummies. I felt like we traveled back in geological time at one point, too, and may have seen some dinosaurs, all the wonders of the museum. So, my man, we had such a good time with you, and we're definitely going to be doing it again.
Oh, absolutely, brother. I had a blast, and I got to tell you guys, man, and especially for the listeners out there who may not always have that opportunity to meet you guys and have a conversation with you one-on-one. You know, what struck me so much about that, in all seriousness, is I found myself meeting fellow brothers from the standpoint of basically you got three follow maths there, right? People that are just lovers of knowledge and of learning. And the way you gentlemen have approached this podcast and this journey that you're on is with no bias, no prejudices. It's just going where the evidence takes you, the facts takes you, where truth takes you, and finding out how that unfolds. And then you're sharing it with your listeners, and it allows us to just open our minds in a way that I don't think many of us would have that opportunity to otherwise.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you something I learned when we were around you, and it's interesting because this wasn't about you. What I learned was that Jason Pentrail, my colleague here, is quite the wrestling aficionado as well.
Yeah.
Yes. And Jason and I have struck up quite a friendship, separate and aside from what we had going on down here in the trip. You know, and it's been wonderful, man. Just going back and forth and growing with you guys, man, has been so great for me. It's opened up my eyes. It's opened up the world for me, and just a great deal. It's amazing the journey that life takes you in, who you interact in, who you meet with, man, and you share these things that you never even knew that you would ever share.
And it's so well put, Lash. And a lot of times people ask me, brother, they say, who are the 7-Age Research Associates? Who are these people? Who are the associates? And well, there's the core three of us here, but there's also people like our brother Lash LaRue. There's George Howard, Randall Carlson, Chris Moore, Randy Daniel, Al Goodyear. We can go on and on and on. All the people that we've interviewed, all the people that we've sat down and talked to, we consider all of you folks out there part of the associates. We share our research, we share time, we break bread with one another, we go places together and do things and focus on our research. And so the Research Associates has a core is just a big group of people with like minds, people who want to get out there and learn and chase that knowledge. And we find it in so many different places, so many different ways, even getting out to the international community now. 7Ages is beginning to get a foothold overseas, and we're getting a lot more listeners and followers throughout Europe and Asia and all over the world. So, if you bring something to the conversation, no matter what that is, and you help, push these interests and this knowledge forward, then you're one of the research associates. So we just wanted to kind of clear that up for everybody.
Well, and that's what I love about it is how inclusive that all feels. And the beauty in my mind has become the purity that's underlying all that. You know what I mean? Like, again, you're not bringing any kind of dogmatic biases or prejudices to any conversation whatsoever. It's so open-ended. And when you're looking at facts and when you're looking at perspectives, because each of us bring our own perspectives to even that set of the same facts, correct? And so that allows us to be so much more open-minded, man. And we stand on the shoulders of each other. That's what's beautiful about these relationships that we're building with one another. That's what's beautiful about this fabric, this tapestry that is being woven together that is the 7Ages. Again, just as you said, there's the three of you who are the core and the bread and the butter and the foundation, the cornerstones, if you will, of what you have going on. And then you have this influence that you're having on those that are around you that just creates a spider web effect of these threads that are going in so many different directions. And it makes us all better, more well-rounded, and more honest in our perceptions because of it.
Hey, Lash, some would say the bread and the butter, but I think after all the snow we've seen here in the Carolinas recently, I'm going to have to say it's the eggs, the milk, and the bread. Okay.
Right. You guys have been hammered. And it makes me wonder, what do you do? Make a milk sandwich?
Yeah, I was speculating, by the way, about that in the wee hours with Dr. Atlantis. Okay. And he is, I believe, in the great state of Georgia, just a little south of us, but he is one of the co-hosts of Monster Talk, which is a fantastic skeptical podcast that we, of course, really appreciate. And he and I have been going back and forth about the meaning behind the eggs, the milk, and the bread phenomena. And we came to the same conclusion, although we're trying to construct a way that we might be able to not only form a hypothesis, but, test this. We really think it's all about making French toast. And so our first, I guess it's not too early to be able to talk about this, right? But so what we intend to do first and foremost is to, introduce a poll some way, maybe via social media, where we will just see if people who are buying the eggs and the milk and the bread before snowpocalypses occur, if they're also buying pancake syrup. That would be a key indicator, don't you think?
Oh, definitely. Dead giveaway. No question about it. Dead giveaway. And ironically enough, if this is a bit of singularity, I happen to have eaten French toast within a half hour of coming on the air with you guys.
What?
Now, Lash, I got to know, what was it at Waffle House?
No, it was not. I am known to frequent the Whiz Off of his house a great deal, but I was not at Waffle House this evening. This was within the comfort of my own home.
Well, that's good.
Well, in case anybody out there needs to know this, the official on the road breakfast meeting place for the 7Ages Research Associates is your local Waffle House.
Yeah.
So if we're in your area and it's breakfast time, you'll pretty much find us there.
That's true. Hey, listen, I gotta do
as I have taught you gentlemen well, the cardinal rule is you have to play the official Waffle House songs on the Waffle House jukebox when you go in and you eat breakfast.
You actually did that, yeah.
Yes, I did. Absolutely, I did.
Yeah. Hey, look, I got to do a couple of shout outs, Lash. Well, my kids have dialed in here. They're watching us on, I think they're going to watch us. We're watching us on YouTube right now. So my daughter Larissa back home in the homelands of Arkansas. And then my son, Matthew, is watching from Japan right now.
Wow.
Where he's so that's actually pretty cool. So we've got some international reach tonight, gentlemen.
How nice.
Welcome to the Waldos.
That's pretty amazing. That's phenomenal. And at first, I have to admit, I thought you said the Badlands of Arkansas for some reason.
That's what I said. I mean, the homelands.
Yes. I just thought that sounds like a hometown that a masked wrestler is from, the Badlands of Arkansas.
Yeah. It's actually, I'll shout out to my hometown peeps, Russellville and Dover, Arkansas.
Oh, beautiful.
Good places.
Absolutely. There's our wonderful chat icon, by the way. And for those of you who are at home listening in, if you'd like to join us in the chat, it's going to make that noise. Apparently, I can't disable that for the time being. But then again, some tech wizardry on the fly has been known to occur here in the bunker. But you can find that right there at 7ages.org. And of course, once we get off the line with this fabulous gentleman, we will put out some other information about how you can join the call. But hey, Lash, I do want to ask you, do you have plans for 2019 already set in motion? I'm sure you do, because you really get around. I mean, you're an artist. You know, you're a former pro wrestler, although I think really you basically are still a professional wrestler and always will be in my mind. But you also do a lot of charity work. You're involved with your church. I mean, what have you got planned for 2019?
Yeah, exactly. I'm looking forward to getting a little bit of sleep towards the beginning of February, because my January and my December has just been jam-packed. And I'm taking a group of youth, some high school age students on an outing, on a retreat, as a matter of fact, January 3rd through the 5th. So I'll have my hands full with them in the mountains of Alabama, doing some Bible study and doing some instructive, just team building exercises and fellowship and growing closer to each other and closer to our faith. And also, I've got a big event coming up. Actually, on New Year's Eve, I'll be drawing caricatures for about 6.5 hours in Mississippi. So,
wow,
my calendar has been full already, and it has very much been full throughout of December of me doing a lot of Christmas parties and holiday events. And I'm looking forward to just taking a little bit of a break, spending some time with family, and then revving back up for what's coming up in spring and in summer, and seeing where the world takes us, man.
I think you deserve a nap after all the work that you've been up to. And it's great to hear that you're staying busy. But, man, I tell you, again, you got to be sure that you at least leave a little time for some more adventure with us in the future, because we're definitely coming back down your way in 2019 and cannot wait to make it back to the LaRue Bayou for another visit with my friend and my brother, Lash LaRue.
Absolutely, gentlemen. You guys come anytime, and you know how flexible I am. When you guys hit the button and say go, I start packing things up. I get my bindle stick like an old hobo, and fill it full of goodies, and we start traveling down the road.
That's absolutely right. Well, we will be looking forward to doing it again. And my man, again, happy holidays. Merry Christmas to you. We will be in touch, and you keep in touch also. And thank you for all that you do, all that you've done for us, being a wonderful host, and above all else, just being a friend to the 7 Ages Research Associates.
Hey, guys. Hey, Micah, to you, to my buddy Jason, to Waldo, man, you guys, congratulations on a phenomenal year. You accomplished a lot. You did a great deal, and I just want to be one of those who step up there and say congratulations on that. I see even greater things coming for you in 2019, and Merry Christmas to all of you, all of your families, and I hope that it's all very kind and wondrous for you.
You're too kind, brother. Lash LaRue, ladies and gentlemen, and we look forward again to sharing some space, maybe breaking some bread around the table at the old Waffle House with you in 2019, my man. Take care out there, okay?
Yes, sir. You got it. Y'all do the same, and let's let bones on roulette. Let the good times roll.
The very best. Lash LaRue, ladies and gents, true friend of the 7 Ages Research Associates. Guys, I've got a magnificent idea, by the way, for the Research Associates here. Maybe we could all move to our smartphones and get into the chat room that way, because then we can control the little audio issue of that. Yeah, coming down the line. At least that way it won't be coming through on our end. It's totally fine if folks at home are hearing that. That way they can keep up to date on what the latest is going in terms of the chat may actually be. And of which, I think we'll be getting rid of that here in just a moment.
Yeah. So there's also on the live feed on the YouTube channel, you can also jump in chat there too.
That's right. Yeah, let's go down all the ways that people can participate in the conversation. Got a lot of folks around the globe right now who are tuning in and joining the conversation, even if only listening. But if you'd like to talk with us, we're going to be playing some audio sound bites and no doubt hearing from some more friends over the course of the evening. But here are the ways to reach us in the meantime. First and foremost, you can call us via telephone. Landline works best. That is by no means the only way that you can reach us. And if you want to dial the program, it's 828-398-4886. You can also send us a text message if you don't want to talk, but you would like to join the conversation nonetheless. 1-828-367-7201 is the way to text message the program. Be sure and tweet at us if you're on Twitter. We are at the number 7 Ages Research. And then finally, you can also email us at info@7ages.org. All those ways are viable for reaching the fellows and I over the course of the evening. All that information, if your memory isn't like mine, you don't have the ability to be a Sherlock Holmes, a mastermind, into your mind palace, and remember all those things, just go to 7ages.org, and in the player where you're actually watching this video, if you're not already on YouTube watching it on our channel, you can actually find all this information right there on 7ages.org. So those are the ways to reach us, and we'll look forward to hearing from some of you guys over the course of the evening, in addition to some other friends of the associates. So fellas, 2018, wow, what a year, huh?
Yeah, I'll agree with that. As a matter of fact, I'd characterize that as a year that I did not see coming.
You never do with these projects, do you?
Yeah, I mean, things have like really went exceptionally well, and all the people that we've met and all the places that we've gone and the things that we've talked about it was a very pleasant surprise to me, because I mean, it's beyond my expectations for this project.
Well, the word surprise, James, I think is perfect, because when we first sat down to talk about this project, none of us really knew exactly where it was going to go, what it was going to turn into. And one thing that was really important to all of us is we just said, you know what, let's get out there on the road. Let's start doing some research. Let's start talking to some folks and just kind of let it organically, grow and develop and change into whatever it's going to be. And here we are a year later. But, that first trip that we went north to Ohio and West Virginia, a real magical trip for the team, to say the least. At Meadowcroft Rock Shelter, sitting down with James Adovazio, doing that interview, getting to see these pre-Clovis sites, and the Serpent Mound and Chillicothe and all those places in Ohio that we got to go, the Adena Mound, the Grave Creek Mound there in West Virginia, and just getting out on the road, meeting people, and all the museum folks and everybody we met on that trip just really set the pace for what 7 Ages would become in 2018. And we've just continued to get that good feedback, and we're, continuing to grow the audience, and we're getting there.
That's true. Although I would differ with you on one thing. You said that nobody foresaw where this was all going. Now, as the resident mentalist of the team, of course, I foresaw all of that. And yet, for some reason, even knowing all of the mess, all of the toiling, all of the traps, I went along with it anyway, and here we are. So that's the treasure of friendship right there. I knew what kind of silliness you two would be up to, and here we are.
So,
yeah, well, the fact that people are willing to listen, and like Lash just said, the people that we get to work with, and I hope the listeners pick up on that too, is, there's a lot of work that goes into a podcast, a YouTube channel, a website, writing articles, all the things we do, but we do it because we love it, and we do it because we want to share. We want to share this information with people. We want people to be excited about history, and learn what history and archaeology is right in their backyard that most people never ever consider. And so to get out there and meet folks and talk to different people in different disciplines, different scientists, different avocationalists, amateurs, or just people who have an interest in these things, we're really starting to reach more folks. And, these things are important. And, on that note, I just want to take a second here to talk about one thing. Is I know you hear this, everybody out there. You hear this all the time on all your podcasts. We need rates, we need reviews, we need these types of things. But that's what really grows a podcast. And being completely honest, we need more of those. We have 17 rates and reviews right now. We would really like to be at 25 within the next month. So I would like to take this time just to encourage everybody, if you haven't taken just a moment to give us a rate and review, it's so vitally important to growing the show. When those rates and reviews go up, we get pushed up the lists a lot further. People are able to see the show, more people become aware of it, and then we're able to reach the goals that we have to grow the show in the future throughout 2019 and beyond. So please, if you haven't taken that moment, it only takes a second. Please go to, Apple Podcast, iTunes, or your favorite podcatcher and just take a moment to give us that rate and review. It help us out tremendously.
Yeah. Go to the YouTube channel and like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. So every after every show it goes up on the your favorite podcatcher. We put the shows up on YouTube as well, because I know we know a lot of people like to listen that way. And there's also other great videos of us on location in places and doing interviews with some very interesting people.
Yeah, leave it to me to, during a live broadcast, to go into the experiments tab on Google Chrome and start learning the unique ways via the beta channel and otherwise that you can actually mute individual tabs. That's right. Audio wizardry at its finest in the moment, as always. So again, I want to put this out there to folks. If you are listening and you'd like to join us tonight, again, you can call us by phone if you have a question for the team, or if you'd like to share a story, a favorite science story of 2018, or just a memory, maybe something you heard on the podcast that you like. You can call us 1-828-398-4886 or text the program at 828-367-7201. We'll like to hear from all of you guys. And of course, if you'd like to email us, that will work to info@sevenages.org. I'll be monitoring all incoming audio and data streams throughout the night to make sure that we have input from folks. And of course, speaking of input, we've already got some, which there were some fine folks, friends of ours, who weren't able to join us yet, or at very least weren't able to join us live tonight. And so they were able to record their segments in advance. And so throughout the course of the evening, at least a couple of our friends are going to be joining us in that fashion too. Before we get to some audio, though, fellas, I would like to talk about favorite stories of 2018, and there are almost too many to count. As a matter of fact, almost there could probably be separate subjects that we would do favorite stories on, but just for the sake of time, we'll pick one story. I'm sure you guys have probably got one in mind, but if you're thinking about it, I'll go ahead and I'll lead off. And no, I'm not going to pick the Hiawatha Crater story, because I'm sure that's going to be a popular one. In fact, I know one of our guests is going to be talking a good bit about that with us tonight. But
we'll get to that one, right?
Yeah, there will be plenty of discussion about that. I mean, it arguably was one of the more controversial studies, but some also kind of looked at that as, I think, a gateway to a controversial idea seeing more widespread acceptance. No, for me, actually, what I want to touch on is a science story that's outside the realm of history and archaeology, and that has to do with teleportation. There were a number of advancements in quantum teleportation that occurred this year that, strangely, maybe with the political environment in 2018, it's been a lot of contentious news reporting over the last 12 months. Some things kind of fall to the wayside, and they don't get the attention I think that they deserve. And one of them that really fascinated me was a team of researchers who basically are using what they call quantum dots to enable functional limited, and this has to do with information, not like teleporting a physical body across distances, but this has to do with essentially people for communication purposes, utilizing quantum physics to create a functional, testable version of what in the future may be actual teleportation. And it essentially revolves around what we call quantum entanglement, spooky action at a distance, as Einstein called it. Now, there was a test that the Chinese did a few years ago, of course, where they were able to essentially demonstrate this with regard to a satellite. And at the time, it was questionable whether or not they had indeed used quantum communication and achieved what they claimed that they had, but it was later confirmed. And indeed, this spooky action at a distance, which involves basically two particles, despite being separated over a distance, having an effect on one another. That's a very, very, very simplified explanation of it. But this technology being utilized in a way for information purposes, I think, is going to be groundbreaking. To tie this in with anthropology, though, what's really interesting to me is the way that we have seen the progression over time. You know, we go back to ancient times where language probably began as a trick. It was probably something our ancient ancestors did, and it was done in a way to warn others of impending dangers. And it may have evolved through adaptations from there into a kind of a trick where we could emulate sounds of certain predators so that we could give our friends, our kindred, a better idea of what the threat actually was. And over time, language becomes more arbitrary, but nonetheless, language forms. And then we start utilizing pictures to tell stories. We have a wonderful array of archaeological evidence from the ancient world that utilizes pictographs and petroglyphs and things like this, varieties of ancient art that convey messages across time. And if you actually think of ancient art in those terms, you're traveling back in time and seeing something that comes out of the mind of an ancient artist. That is truly fascinating. Around the time, of course, of the Phoenicians, we start seeing not only, well, of course, there was written language that predated that, but what we begin to see with the Phoenicians that is passed along to the Greeks and many other cultures thereafter is the use of an alphabet. And over time, as we see the evolution of language and communication becoming more and more complex, then telecommunications. We use, again, we're still using telephones, but the World Wide Web has obviously opened up the world in ways that would have been unforeseeable just a few decades ago. And finally, we're now beginning to see on the cusp of the future where we currently reside, riding the coattails into the ever after of tomorrow, we are beginning to see quantum technologies being instituted in incredibly innovative ways. So to put that in a historical context and look at the progression over time and see where we're heading, this is truly an exciting and at times maybe you could say a scary time for humanity too.
Yeah, there's certainly some ramifications to quantum technologies for different things. One of the things that has been looked at and is being worked on now is essentially code, encrypted communication that cannot be, the encryption can't be broken. And that would be facilitated through quantum entanglement. And, one of the things that I always thought was pretty interesting about this spooky action at a distance is it's really the distance is irrelevant. So it's almost as if distance does not exist in this equation. So, if you've got two particles that have been entangled where their spin is the same direction, when you change the spin on particle A, the spin on particle B theoretically is immediately affected by that action, and distance is irrelevant. So, what's that really say about the nature of the universe?
It's much weirder than, again, what we can perceive in the everyday tells us about nature. Now, of course, when we get down to the quantum level, that's the neat thing, James, is there's a bit of a divide between, Newtonian physics, the world that Einstein saw through relativity, and then again, the quantum level. And that's part of the big problem. I watched this beautiful film the other night. I'm sure you guys have probably seen it, The Theory of Everything, which it's interesting because if you've read Stephen Hawking's book, A Brief History of Time, he said, we may never have a beautiful little elegant short theory that explains a wide array of phenomena. Simply, it may be that the best we'll ever have are partial explanations for different things that occur in nature. The quantum may always be in some way separate from, the rest of reality as we perceive it. So it is interesting, but yeah, I think at least for my own part, what that says is we live in a very strange universe.
Yeah. Hey, so I want to say hi to your special assistant, Lauren, and Kyle Filson, who sent us a couple of messages in the on the YouTube channel, but it looks like he needs to work on his spelling a little bit. Actually, I think it might be his son, Jacob. I'll give you a pass on that.
Is that Jacob in there? Well, hey, it's good to see. And of course, the lovely assistant, Lauren, who is sending messages privately, helping behind the scenes as she always does from somewhere out there. I hope she's, I know, in fact, that she's with her family somewhere down in the great state of Mississippi, but probably in an undisclosed location. And I hope it's cozy wherever she is. Also, a couple of text messages coming in from folks. We also have this one. Hey, guys, hello from NC, and congratulations on your live broadcast. We didn't get a name from that text message, but the area code is 327. So presumably you know who you are. If you do send us a text, let us know your name so that we can get in touch with you and reference your texts by name. We have another one. Any thoughts on the New Horizons probe that's due to make its approach to the Kuiper Belt and object Ultima Thule? Should be interesting to see pictures of an object that old and far from Earth. It's interesting because there's a lot more discussion of astronomy tonight than history and archaeology.
Well, I was going to say, if folks, if you've got a question about something or something we talked about in the past or something we haven't talked about at all, or ideas for shows or whatever, shoot us an email, send us a message tonight, and just let us know. We'll be, between the three of us, we can probably at least confuse the heck out of you before it's over with.
That's right. You know what's interesting, and I fully want to admit right now that I'm looking at this reference to Ultima Thule. That, of course, written Thule, so it looks like Thule, but this is a reference to a concept from the ancient Nordic traditions. Actually, I guess the idea really came from a Greek sailor who claimed that he went so far north that he had found this landmass. And I think that Strabo and some of the later historians criticized him and said that, no, you couldn't have possibly sailed that far north and found anything like that. But I believe it was Pythias who dubbed it Ultima Thule. And so this later plays into a lot of Germanic myths and things like that. But I'm double checking on that because, let's see here. Ultima, now they pronounce it Thule. I was under the impression Thule is kind of the German pronunciation. But so anyway, they're talking about object 486958 2014 MU69. And I just want to briefly read from the Wikipedia page about this. So it says, previously designated PT1 and nicknamed Ultima Thule by the New Horizons team. So we did find a way to tie in some history and some mythology with this. Yeah? See, it works. Yeah. Although there are a lot of continuums, guys, between history and mythology and things we see in the sky. Just look at, astronomy and constellations, for instance. But they say that this has been redubbed Ultima Thule by the New Horizons team. It's a trans-Neptunian object from the Kuiper Belt located in the outermost regions of the solar system. It was discovered by astronomers using the Hubble Space Telescope, actually back in 2014. The irregular-shaped classical Kuiper Belt object is a suspected contact binary or close binary system and measures approximately 30 kilometers in diameter. Now, as of what has happened with regard to this object this year, on March 13th of this year, NASA announced that 2014 MU69 would receive the nickname Ultima Thule. The decision, I'm going to stick with that Germanic pronunciation, I guess. It's just ingrained in my head from my
Thule, right?
Thule is how it's written, yeah.
Yeah, right.
But they say the decision was based on the results of a public voting campaign. Ultima, as it's known for short, serves as an unofficial name for the object until the Discovery team proposes an official name to the IAU that is consistent with existing naming guidelines. The New Horizons team has decided not to go forward with the formal naming process until after the flyby, when the properties of 486958 2014 MU69 are known well enough to choose a suitable name. Why don't they just stick with the number for the naming convention? That's sexy.
Yeah, everybody likes sexy numbers.
I know I do.
Hey, while we're talking about something that's completely not related to this, just popped in my mind was, I just want to send out thoughts and prayers to the victims of the tsunami down in Jakarta, Indonesia. I think it was yesterday, about 24 hours ago. So pretty bad deal down there, and I think it was a kind of a special situation where they had a tsunami that was generated essentially locally by part of the Krakatoa family of volcanic islands. And I don't know if it was an eruption or there was an undersea landslide or what, but it seemed to have slipped past the tsunami detection system they have there, and caused a lot of damage and a lot of heartache and a lot of bad stuff there.
Absolutely, yeah. Our hearts go out to all of them. And briefly, I also want to mention that was Josh Carter, writing Russellville, Arkansas, who asked
my cousin actually. Hey Josh, how you doing, man? Thanks for writing.
We got most of the Waldo family on here right now.
I sent a text out to damn near everybody I know. So
there you go. Well, we're glad to have them here joining us in the location, which occurs in many places. We call it the Cross Time Pub. If you're new to the 7 Ages Audio Journal, it is a podcast that covers all aspects of science, but really our focus is history, archaeology, a lot of geology, also science and culture in the more general sense. Of course, our hosts, the gentleman joining us tonight, although we haven't got our lower thirds down here, but I am Micah Hanks, and of course, Jason Pentrail, our environmental scientist down there in Charleston, South Carolina. Say howdy, sir.
Good evening. That's me.
That's him. And then, of course, James Waldo. All in the family, since all of them are here as far away as Japan. And hello to your son. And of course, thank you for your service as well, young Mr. Waldo. We appreciate all you guys. And James, actually, I have to just say both you guys, having served our country over the years in official capacities with our government. I won't give out further details for right now. I'm just going to leave it at that and say thank you, because that's one of the things I like to remember, especially around the holidays. People have made personal sacrifice so that we can all live comfortably and happily. That's one thing I value about my relationship with you guys, and it's very meaningful to me to be able to work with you in that capacity.
Honor to do so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I guess it's about time for us to get to some audio sound bites. And one of the first ones that we have here, since we haven't really talked about a lot of archaeology yet, Dr. Randy Daniel is someone who has kind of been in our orbit since we've been discussing astronomy over the course of the evening. And Jason, you recently had an opportunity to catch up and talk with Dr. Daniel, who's a specialist in a variety of different lithics, that is, stone tools found throughout the Southeast.
Yeah, that's right. So I attended the Greenville, North Carolina Artifact and Archaeological Show here recently. And Dr. Daniel was there. He was working on some of his research pertaining to fluted points throughout the state of North Carolina. And, I just want to say we have this network here in the Southeast of anthropologists and archaeologists that have been more than supportive of what we want to do here at Seven Ages. And they have been mentors to us. They have allowed us to be involved with their projects. They've allowed us to document many of those projects. And they've been kind enough to sit down and speak with us. And, those people I want to give thanks to, and that's Dr. Albert Goodyear from the University of South Carolina. He is retired, but he's still very active with the research going on there. He has been a mentor to many, many folks throughout the Southeast in the world of archaeology. He's always been sort of a statesman, and he's the go-between between the amateur side of the collectors and the professionals doing the research. He's very well respected. And so I just want to take an opportunity to thank Dr. Goodyear for all he's done for us. I'm looking forward to seeing him again in January coming up. And also a couple other people I just want to thank before we get into the interview with Dr. Daniel is Dr. Christopher Moore, also a very active archaeologist and researcher. He's been doing some fantastic projects, and he's included us. He's been very kind with his time. We really, really appreciate working with him. Another young archaeologist, but who's full of drive, Joe Wilkinson. Joe is known by just about every collector in the Southeast, it seems like. Great guy, fantastic personality, and he's always willing to work with us and help us out. So big thanks to Joe. And of course, Dr. Randy Daniel from East Carolina University. He's the chair of the anthropology department there. Just a fantastic gentleman, so kind, so passionate about the topic. And so, Dr. Daniel, we certainly want to thank you for your time and for all you've done to help move Seven Ages forward. And we, again, consider all of these gentlemen part of the Seven Ages Research Associates. We look forward to working with them more in the future.
Absolutely do. In fact, I just want to mention that the very first text message that we got, I'd asked folks, include your name. I just got another text from that same number, and he said, sorry, I forgot to identify myself. This is Randy Daniel in North Carolina. I appreciate your advocacy of Southeastern archaeology. And again, congratulations on the end of the year broadcast. So Dr. Daniel, you're right there listening, and here we are talking about you, singing your praises. We want to thank you for all the good work that you do. You've educated us a lot. You're educating graduate students. You are educating the public in general on these subjects. That's very meaningful. It means a lot to us, and that's, of course, why we pay tribute to guys like you here on this program. So without further ado, fellas, why don't we get to our first audio soundbite of the evening, and that is, of course, the conversation that Jason did earlier this month with Dr. Randy Daniel, discussing lithic types of the Southeast and much other beautiful aspects of Southeastern archaeology.
Jason Pentrail, live at the Greenville Native American Artifact and Archaeology Show in Greenville, North Carolina. I'm joined today by the chair of the Department of Anthropology at East Carolina University, Dr. Randy Daniel. Dr. Daniel's interests include the archaeology of prehistoric hunter-gatherer adaptations at the end of the last ice age. His methodological specializations include stone tool analysis, spatial analysis, and hunter-gatherer settlement systems. Since arriving at ECU in 1996, his research has fallen into two categories. First, researching and investigating prehistoric settlements along the Tar River in eastern North Carolina, and documenting the statewide occurrence of fluted spear points throughout the state of North Carolina. So Dr. Daniel, thank you for joining me on 7 Ages Audio Journal today.
Thank you, Jason. I'm pleased to be here.
Well, you're here for a very specific reason. There's going to be a lot of artifacts here today for people to look at and admire, but you're here on a mission. So what exactly is it that you're here doing today?
Sure. I've been working with private collections now for several decades. I believe that under certain circumstances, private collections have scientific value. I work with collectors and record information on the fluted points that you just mentioned as part of a statewide survey that I've been doing now.
So when we were talking about fluted points, we talk a lot about Clovis and pre-Clovis on the show. When we're talking about fluted points, kind of just give the listener a general overview of what exactly that means and what time period are we referring to?
Sure. Fluted points are lancelet spear points. They're 3 to 5 inches long. They are the most characteristic feature of these points is what's called a flute, which is a channel-like flake that appears at the base of the point. There's some debate about what the utility of that, but presumably it functions to facilitate hafting. The significance of these points is they represent the first diagnostic artifact of the earliest people of North Carolina. And by classifying these points and by the presence of those early North Carolinians in North Carolina, the age of these points is roughly 13,000 years.
Okay, very good. So, when we talk about that specific time, we've got the paleocultures, and then we move into sort of a transitional period into the early archaic. And I know that you have a great interest in that early archaic period as well. And specifically, you've done a great deal of research on what's known as the Hardaway culture, which is a regional culture here in North Carolina. So for those who are unfamiliar with it, what is it that's so unique about the Hardaway culture, and kind of give us a general overview of that particular culture?
Sure. The Hardaway culture falls at the end of the Paleo-Indian period. Some researchers classify it as late Paleo-Indian, some early archaic. It just really depends upon the defining criteria one wishes to use. The significance of the culture is it appears to be the first settling in a major demographic way of prehistoric inhabitants that in North Carolina that appeared to center on the Piedmont of North Carolina, although Hardaway points are present in the coastal plain and a few in the mountains as well. But the heartland seems to be right around the Piedmont region.
Now, something that's really interesting about this, not only where they're located, but the type of materials that they were using and the area that they were living. So the 7 Ages team has on several occasions gone to Morrow Mountain and that general region. So if you could, for someone who's maybe unfamiliar with the Morrow Mountain region, can you give a description of where it was that the Hardaway culture was originating from, and what was the lithic quarries and all the things in that region that kind of added to their culture?
The Hardaway site is located in Stanley County, North Carolina, along the Yadkin River, in the southern end of the Uwharrie Mountains. The Uwharrie Mountains are a loose chain of mountains that extend from Stanley County up into near Ashboro. The significance archaeologically is they're capped with a metavolcanic stone, a metamorphosed volcanic stone that has the unique feature of being highly flakeable. That was a very attractive quality for the earliest North Carolinians, and then that this was an important source of tool stone. Morrow Mountain in particular was probably the key quarry site that was utilized in prehistoric times, particularly for the Hardaway cultures. As part of my dissertation research looking at the Hardaway site, I looked at again using collections around North Carolina and into South Carolina. I found the movement of points, Hardaway points made from Uwharrie rhyolite, as I like to call it, from the Yadkin River all across the Piedmont and even down into South Carolina.
And it's Dr. Randy Daniel, and the complete audio interview we will be featuring on the extended podcast, which you can find at 7ages.org. That, of course, will be available at our website probably in just a few days. Did we lose Jason from the chat, Waldo?
Sorry, I had my microphone on mute there. Yeah, I think we lost him off the everything here.
He's off the grid.
He's off the grid.
Well, he knows how to get back into the chat. Otherwise, buddy, it's just you and me. So, well, while we're getting him back, part of the importance of what Dr. Daniel's talking about there, of course, we're discussing working stone into tools which have been used by ancient cultures. And in truth, some indigenous cultures around the world still utilize such stuff to this day. I think we've got Jason coming back in. But I mean, from a geological perspective, this is always interesting as well. Now, first and foremost, before I was interested in artifacts and anthropology, I was really a geology nerd as a kid. I was a rock collector. I've told you this, right? That I had a little rock collection.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and so that's one of the aspects of this that we love is the fact that, of course, while we're looking at stone that has been fashioned into arrowheads and other artifacts, axe heads, blades, other kinds of things too, not just projectile points, we're also talking about stone and geological processes that make these different kinds of stone, some of which are more conducive to the creation of tools. And, whether or not it's a tool, the stone by itself to me is just about as fascinating.
Yeah. The stone is actually what was one of the most important factors in that. And you can see indigenous cultures in other places, other continents, island nations, or tribes that are in Brazil or in the deepest Amazon, and they don't actually have those resources at hand. So most of their tools are made from wood or made from cane or some biologic, some plant or something like that. So one of the things that the natives and the early people in North America had at their disposal, especially on the East Coast, is a couple of really good resources, which are chert and flint, and then rhyolite from the North Carolina area is where it's most popular. But the thing that was important about that is that material lent itself to being shaped for use by humans, and the edges that would be created from this is they were so sharp that they obviously had all kinds of really great uses. So of course those rocks had to form in very special and very different circumstances. Chert and rhyolite have very different formation processes. However, the end result in many cases is the same. So I think that probably allowed that was a resource advantage that indigenous peoples would have had over people from other areas that would enable them to do more things and manipulate their environment in a greater way.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's one of the interesting things about doing Southeastern archaeology is that we see some of the most beautiful lithic material, in my opinion. The different kinds of coastal plains chert are absolutely gorgeous. And in those cases, some of what were referred to as red stones that Dr. Daniel and also Dr. Albert Goodyear and Chris Moore have studied, it's pretty fascinating because it's almost an actual reddish color. And so the name is very fitting, although that's not the reason for the name. But I mean, they're just they're beautiful lithic types. Speaking of Dr. Chris Moore, and James, this is, I think, something that inevitably is going to come up in a conversation like this. Dr. Chris Moore, for those who may not be familiar with his work as an archaeologist or geoarchaeologist, nonetheless will probably be familiar with a very wide... Whoops, I should pot that down before we get to these calls. In fact, we'll go ahead and we'll get to the telephone here, but I want to mention Dr. Chris Moore's paper, which was featured in the journal Nature, which was the paper that defined the whole platinum anomaly situation as we discuss it in relation to the Younger Dryas. But we'll get to that in a moment. Let's first go to the phone lines. We've got area code 252 on the line with us. 252, you're with us live. How are you this evening?
Hello?
Hello. Hey, you may want to turn down the volume in the background. That way you won't have the audio delay.
I'm sorry. This is Jason?
This is Micah. This is Micah of the 7 Ages team.
Hi, Mike. It's Randy Daniel.
Hey, Randy. He's calling in. We've got you live.
Yeah, right. Well, you guys were talking one of my favorite subjects, so I said, well, hell, I just got to give him a call.
Well, we're so glad you did. We lost Jason temporarily. Hopefully he's going to call right back in here in a moment. But yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, what's on your mind tonight, Dr. Daniel?
Well, I just wanted to congratulate you on your live broadcast. And again, I appreciate your bringing archaeology to the public. You know, the advocacy of archaeology is important, and the professionals today are realizing the need to do more public outreach, and sometimes we professionals find that difficult to do. So it's good to have programs like this as kind of a mediator between the professionals and the public to help us get the word out on what we do in a way that's that the public can better appreciate and better understand.
Oh, wow. Boy, that is so kind of you to call in and say, because, again, we obviously agree. We're not qualified archaeologists or professionals per se, avocationalists at very best, but our passion for it and wanting to bring it to a wider audience so that the public can understand and appreciate the science that's being done, that's very important to us. And so, again, coming from you, Dr. Daniel, that really means a lot to us. That's a Christmas gift right there.
Well, I think you mentioned the word passion, and so I think we can certainly I think we share that passion. It's just a matter of kind of channeling that passion in a way that we can create a passion amongst the public, and that today more than ever we need to do that. And when archaeology is not always seen to have a tangible return, if you know what I mean, in a way that other pursuits might have sort of a monetary return or a functional return in some way. But, you know, archaeology is a story of what makes us human, right? It's a story of our origins. And I think that is the key to getting people on board with supporting archaeology that might not otherwise think about it in that sort of way.
Absolutely. You know, Dr. Daniel, as popular as films are like Indiana Jones, which give us a very highly romanticized version of archaeology for the silver screen, when you actually see popular science these days, astronomy is a hot topic. We've been talking about it a little bit tonight. You also see a lot of discussion about physics in general, but you don't quite see as much in terms of celebrity science, as much discussion of serious archaeology. And so, like you're saying, it's so important that this area of science does reach the public, that they find that it is not, first of all, what you see in Indiana Jones, but second, that it is truly fascinating. And like you said so eloquently, it is the story of who we are.
Right. Well, listen, I enjoy a good movie as much as anybody, and I enjoy Indiana Jones. Of course, that tells us more about what the public thinks of entertainment than what movie producers think about archaeology. And so I don't think archaeology needs to be portrayed in a kind of bullwhip and kind of fedora fashion to make it interesting. We just got to kind of rely on other ways to get the story out. I mean, what's more interesting than the story of us? And of course, I'm biased. I have always I've had this enlarged curiosity about the past, but so it's I've never had to kind of justify that interest to myself. But when I teach students about that, I try to portray sort of a passion and raise questions about our origins and the story of humanity in a way that maybe gets them to think about it and pique their interest in a way they haven't thought about it before.
Absolutely. And by the way, we've got Jason back on the line now, Dr. Daniel. So Jason's here.
Okay.
Yeah, Jason.
Good evening.
Hey, Jason. Hey, good to hear you.
Dr. Daniel. Hey, thanks so much for taking the time to call in. You know, it's we just played, a portion of the interview there, and the rest of that interview will be in the podcast. But yeah, like we said, it's working with folks like you that have the passion, that have the drive, and share the interest that we have. It would give us an opportunity to come in and learn from you and work with you. And it's so important that people understand. I think there are a lot of times and I actually hope you can speak to this a little bit. We ran into a lot of situations where people are so distrusting of academics, especially on the amateur side and the collectors. They seem to, be under this impression that you guys are out to get them and take their property and all this type of things. And I know there's been cases in the past where, these type of things have happened to some degree, But can you speak for a moment about the relationship between the amateurs and the professionals?
Sure, of course. Yeah, that's unfortunately that's a common, I'd like to say, misconception, and that's one that perhaps the professionals could do a better job of clarifying with the public. In the end, we rely on the public. There's far more avocationalists out there than there are professionals, and we need to find a way to work together. And so, to your question about the idea that there's an archaeology police out there who are going to, at the sign of some discovery, they're going to swoop in and confiscate person's property or their artifacts. That's just not true. Now, let me make a distinction here between public and private. And public lands, such as government or state-owned lands, I mean, that is illegal to go in there and collect artifacts and dig. That's as it should be. But on private property, it's just nobody's going to swoop in and steal anything or confiscate property. So that rather, if there are archaeological remains on private property, then I would hope that the public would reach out to some professional, some institution that if they have questions about that, then we should be able to work together to record that site, make it recorded in a way that it is known for the future, and not everybody's going to run right out and start digging up a site. And so, but yet it's important to know about these things and just to communicate with the public, if for no other reason, to clarify the misconceptions that you talked about.
Absolutely. Dr. Daniel, I just want to thank you so much for calling in. We've got to get to a few other callers, but I do want to ask you before we let you go, 2019, I'm sure you've got aspirations in the field of archaeology and otherwise. Anything you're looking forward to in the new year?
Oh, well, sure. I'm finishing a book.
Oh, really?
A book on actually North Carolina projected points. I've been working on this now for several years. I'm taking the typology that was established primarily from John Frico's work at the Hardaway site, and been looking at refining the typology and updating it. It's been almost 50 years, more than 50 years since that typology was originated, and I think we've made some additions and refinements to that I hope that this book will be a contribution towards doing that.
Wow, I'm certain it will be, and I can guarantee you one thing, too. Here's a prediction for 2019, Dr. Daniel. You'll find that book in the 7 Ages library. We'll be sure and have one here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, sure. All right, guys. Well, I've enjoyed talking with y'all. Have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and I look forward to seeing y'all in 2019.
Oh, you'll be seeing us. You'll be seeing us for sure, Dr. Daniel.
Okay.
All right. Thanks again.
Take care.
How fantastic. How wonderful to hear from Dr. Randy Daniel, and how wonderful to have Jason back.
Yeah.
I was back, man.
I don't know what all that was about, but hey, technology, right?
I was almost afraid that I was almost afraid that we'd lost you and you wouldn't get to talk to Dr. Daniel. That would have not been good. So not at all. We've got other folks who are trying to call in, and of course we'll get to those calls as soon as we can. If you'd like to reach the program, 828-398-4886 is the way to reach us. And also, of course, a few people are dialing in via Skype. So if you're one of the few who just tried to reach us and you weren't able to, we will go ahead and try and get you back into the program. I want to go to unknown person right now who may be calling in to us. Hello, you're live with us here, 7 Ages Audio Journal.
Hey, bruds. It's your brud, Kyle Filson.
Hey,
Kyle.
How's it going, guys?
Brother Kyle, my man, I am doing wonderful. Merry Christmas to you and yours. How are you, bud?
I'm doing excellent. Merry Christmas to you all and all your families. I noticed that my son Jacob has been watching your video, and I walked in the room, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I'm watching Micah and the guys."
I'll tell you, if he's there, you tell Jacob and Caleb and Luke that I miss them all. And also to Lee. I miss all you guys. Ladies and gentlemen, Kyle Filson, we're in the presence of greatness. This is the co-host of the Expanded Perspectives podcast, and a friend of mine of many years, and a good fellow who, I love coming down and visiting with the entire Filson family. And I've got to get back down there. I wanted to get down there before the end of the year, Kyle, and it hasn't happened. But one of these days, I want to bring these two knuckleheads with me, and we all come, guys.
Well, I agree. We miss you, but I'm not just friends with you. I'm friends with James and Jason as well.
Yeah.
And I love the show. I'm not kidding, folks. This is one of my favorite shows that they do.
Awesome. I appreciate that. And I like your work too. I mean, we touch on ancient history. We'd like to talk about it more, but unfortunately, our show, we talk more about, strange sightings and stories and people's experiences. But history, to me, is one of my favorite subjects. And I just love the work that you're doing. And I can't believe you guys have already been doing it for over a year now. And I try to keep touch and kind of watch what you guys are doing. And I see you going to the various shows and interviewing people. And my hat's off to you. You guys are doing a great job.
Oh, my man.
Yeah, thanks so much, brother. We really appreciate that.
Yeah, we really, really do. We've all got to get together someplace, because there's the one side of what we do, which is
telling you.
Well, what was it, James?
Heavener Runestone. That's where we're going to get together at.
Oh, okay. Yeah. We'll meet.
That's the meeting place.
On an esoteric spot. Well, there's the one side of what we do, which is avocationalists, which, if you've heard us throw that term around tonight, all that means basically is a dedicated amateur. But what we try to do is we try to bring scientific perspectives to the public. And as Dr. Daniel was just talking about with us a moment ago, again, somebody we really respect, one of kind of the big three, in my opinion, here in Southeastern archaeology: Al Goodyear, Randy Daniel, and Chris Moore. Those three are the ones that have been so influential on us. And we're going to get to Dr. Chris Moore here in a moment too, because I've got to, heap some praise on him. We spent some good time with him on a dig site earlier this year, but that's one side of what we do. And then, of course, there is the podcasting side as well, which is, the art of talk, which is, the gear, the equipment, and, of course, interacting with great guys like you, Kyle. You too, though, you and also Cam, my other brother down there, you two are the finest podcasters I've had the pleasure of knowing. I remember the first time I came to visit these guys, I think you guys were rocking the Heil PR40s at that point, Kyle. But, you had this excellent studio. And every time I come and visit you guys, the studio, you've done improvements. You've got something else neat that's going on. But from day one, before you had the paneling on the walls, the nice microphones, the podcast still sounded great. You both have just been great professionals since day one.
Well, I appreciate that. And we still use the Heil PR40s. Those are excellent microphones. We've updated, like you said, over time, and we continue to update. There's always new innovations coming out year after year. We try to stay on the cutting edge and within our budget. But audio, when it comes to podcasting, audio is paramount. If you don't sound good, and especially in today's terms, there's so many more podcasts now than when we started. We were lucky we got in early. I know that you were doing it before us, but there's so many options out there that if you don't sound good or bring to the table a good product, I just don't think you're going to find any good listeners. And you guys bring an excellent product. And I find every episode you guys do is very informative. I know I'm an older man. I'm 42. So
over the hill.
I'm really intrigued with everything that you guys doing about the Clovis culture and the various sites. Have you guys ever been to Mesa Verde in Colorado?
No.
I have, actually. Yeah. It's fantastic.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah, my wife's been there, and she's constantly telling me about it because, she knows I'm into archaeology and things like that. And I'd like to take a trip up there and take the kids and everything and explore, because it just looks really cool. Now, I know that I think James, he grew up around where the Heavener Runestone is. Is that correct?
Yeah. I went to town, high school in that town.
Yeah. See, that's something I've always wanted to see. I remember reading years ago when I was in my early 20s about the Heavener Runestone, as well as like the Kensington Runestone and a lot of other stones that are, with these runes on there. And to me, that's always fascinating, because when you were in school, traditionally they didn't talk about the Vikings and stuff landing here. They kind of mentioned it like maybe in like 5 minutes of a 2-week-long course in something with ancient history. And to me, it was always like, I wish the professor or the teacher back in those days before I was in college, but I was always like, I wish they would touch more on that, because that to me seems way more interesting. But they would just kind of skip over that. And, there's so many traces of other cultures coming to North America. And I'm glad that there's shows like yours that touch on those subjects.
Absolutely.
Well,
I just got to say, guys, something else that we're going to be talking about a lot in the coming year is another aspect of history that really gets left out, which is what really happened when Europeans arrived on the new continent and how this adversely affected indigenous cultures here. And that's a very important. I mean, again, we've already talked about it some on our shows, but there's a book I think that really anybody who truly takes North American history seriously, they should all read American Holocaust by David Stannard. And we've got a double part episode teasing a little bit of what's coming up in the new year for us, a 2-part episode where we went deep with some of the premier scholars, in my opinion, and also activists who address Native American issues from a law and politics side of things. And this is an issue that I know from my own part, we virtually never heard about that when I was in school. Even on up into college level, this is just something that you never hear about. And it's not something that's considered fringe. It's not something that's considered, I guess you might say it's controversial, but you can't unwrite history. And when Stannard wrote that book, there was controversy about the title. There was controversy about everything. But again, history is history. And we have to understand the impact, of what occurs when cultures meet. And we've been talking a little bit about astronomy over the course of the night. And I mentioned Stephen Hawking, the late Stephen Hawking, earlier. That's something that he often said, and in his concerns about the eventual visitation to Earth by extraterrestrials or any kind of, contact we may have with them technologically or otherwise, he said, we need to be careful because he said, if you look at the history of contact between cultures, he says it doesn't usually fare very well for those which are less advanced technologically. And so, it's interesting that there are even physicists, some of the great scientific thinkers of our day, who look at that aspect of history. And like you said, Kyle, there are certain things I think that really need to be focused on more in the classroom. That's part of what we're trying to do. What about you guys? 2019, what is 2019 holding for Expanded Perspectives? I'm sure you guys have got some stuff in store, and hopefully that'll include a visit from us.
Well, that's funny that you were asking me that, because I was just about to ask you what's in store for the 7 Ages Research Group. I don't know what we're going to be exploring in 2019. I have no idea. We usually have a staff meeting every week or every other week, and we kind of decide what we're going to be talking about in the upcoming weeks. But as far as like 2019 in general, I have no clue. Well, lots of times it's influenced just off of something as simple as an email from a listener, which will kind of change the trajectory of what we want to explore. Sometimes it's something that's popping up on other websites that seems to be like, like a flap of sightings of a certain thing that might steer it in a different direction. So we try to keep an open mind. We try to change the subject matter from show to show. But I was going to ask you guys that. I mean, now, you've done a lot in 2018. Was there anything, I remember Jason was mentioning earlier, how a lot of people, just like we talked about, what I was talking about previously, about people just don't realize the kind of cultures that were here that just never really talked about. Jason was mentioning that there's archaeology in like your backyard, and then just the general public just doesn't know that it's there. I know that he knows where to find the megalodon teeth, which is pretty cool. And you probably know some other sites on finding like Clovis tips and things like that. But in 2018, through all your travels and all your interviews and things, was there anything learned that you didn't previously know when you started?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. To say the least. And, Kyle, the beauty of getting out on the road and spending time with folks is you always learn something. And we kind of loosely plan these research trips, but man, they never go exactly how you think they're going to. And we always come back just kind of blown away. Like, man, how do you even begin to process everything that we just learned? And, getting down to like your neck of the woods and learning more about Texas archaeology and seeing what you guys have. Of course, we're bound to learn things that way. And as far as, what's coming up, we've barely scratched the surface. I mean, we have a mile-long list of topics that we want to talk about. In the coming year, we want to reach out more to an international audience and kind of bring them into the fold as well, so we can learn more about other cultures. We do have kind of a heart for the Native American indigenous cultures. That's really my passion, and I drag these guys on a lot of research trips with me focused around that. But it's something that's accessible to us here in the Southeast, and something I think we all have enjoyed. And it's going to be, in 2019, we want to continue to pursue that, but we also want to keep diving into some of these sort of finite issues. For instance, we had Aaron Dieter Wolf on one episode talking about ancient tattooing. And, that's something that's not usually talked about in academic circles as much. It's not something that's really considered as to what that meant for the culture. So we want to continue to dig into that. David Ian Howe and Megan Dennison came on, and they talked about ethnocenology, the domestication of the dog, and how that plays into indigenous culture. So all of those kind of unique topics we're going to continue. Someone here in the YouTube chat mentioned Vikings, and Rune Erickson, brother, we definitely want to do a show on Vikings, because even as we're having this conversation, there's new archaeological site discovered in Canada that's pushing that conversation forward. So I definitely want to do a big in-depth episode on Vikings. It's something I've always been interested in. So just a few things to look forward to in 2019 as we move forward.
Absolutely. By the way, that's pronounced Rune. Yeah.
There we go. Got to get that echo on there.
And hello to you, my brother over there in the land of ice and snow, one of my favorite guys. And indeed, I think I got a coffee mug or something that needs to be coming your way. So, it must be kind of late over there, though, on your end of things. Thanks for hanging out with us. And Kyle, thank you for calling in and joining us for this portion of the conversation, my man. Again, I keep saying it, but I'm going to get back down there and visit with you and the family, maybe go to another ball game with the boys, get out there, cook out, and stare at the stars, crack open a dad juice, just have some great conversation about life. I miss you, man.
Yeah, it sounds like an excellent time. Well, I don't want to take up too much of your guys' time. I just want to tell you that I appreciate what you guys are doing. Keep it on. I know earlier you mentioned about get people giving reviews and rating the show and things like that, and that's just it, man. Just keep your nose to the grindstone. Just keep working, keep pumping it out, and you guys will have success.
We appreciate you, brother. You take care of my brud down in the Lone Star State.
All right. All three of you guys have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
We will indeed. Thank you so much,
Kyle. Thank you, brother.
All right. Bye-bye.
the one and only Kyle Filson right there.
For real.
What a great guy, man. What a great guy.
Oh, yeah. Well, we've heard from some truly great people over the course of tonight, just in general. I mean, again, I'm still kind of amazed to have heard from Dr. Daniel there. And, he won't.
Yeah, Brother Lash, Kyle Filson. I mean, we've got a great chat going on over here at the YouTube site.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of family members involved. This is a really good time. I'm thoroughly enjoying it.
Yeah, that Lash LaRue, you can't beat Lash LaRue. I tell you, he is.
Brother Lash.
What a great guy, though, and the stuff that they're involved with over there, where Lash is. I was really impressed with what they do.
That's right. The Duggar Mountain Music Hall that they have there. A beautiful venue. They do live telecasts of musicians performing, not just, of course, gospel music and things, because it is associated with their ministry, but it's also, regional artists that come through, country, bluegrass, all different kinds of things. And so it's a really, really great location. But we kind of got the behind the scenes tour. We got to see the recording facility that they have, the lodging space. We realized after being on the road for several days, getting displaced by a hurricane and ending up in a rather questionable roadside hotel, that we should have gone and stayed at Duggar Mountain with Lash LaRue.
Yeah. The next day when I saw the lodging there, I thought, man, we should not have spent that night in Birmingham.
That's right. Yeah, but boys, that's what makes it an adventure. Okay,
yeah.
Those kind of
they say the difference between an adventure and an ordeal is your attitude.
That's right.
There you go.
Maybe the lodging.
I'm seriously, James Waldo and I, trying to knock the dust off our boots and pounding back Coronas and looking for Jason, who's already out in the car because he's not going to sleep in the hotel room that he just booked. But we know, in truth, all kidding aside, those are the spice of life. Those are the adventures. And this last trip that we did, let's talk about that for a minute, because this was one of the funnest things for me. And I got to tell you, Jason, I told you this already, but as magical as our first trip was, where we went up to Ohio, we went to some of the remarkable Hopewell culture mound sites, including the actual mound city. We went to the Grave Creek Mound in West Virginia. We went to the enigmatic Meadowcroft Rock Shelter, one of the very first designated pre-Clovis sites excavated beginning in 1973 by J.M. Adavasio, who very generously met us and who spoke with us there, did an interview with us. If you'd like to see that interview, by the way, you can find that right here on our YouTube channel. Just check out 7 Ages on YouTube, 7 Ages Research, and look for the interview with J.M. Adavasio talking about the Meadowcroft Rock Shelter. He gets into everything with us, though. We even touched on Göbekli Tepe with him, the famous site in Anatolia, Turkey, which has aroused some controversy due to its age, although to me there's really nothing controversial about that. I mean, the dating mechanisms, as far as what modern science can tell us, are quite accurate, and we know the age of Göbekli Tepe. I guess what's controversial is the fact that, as old as it is, what was going on there really kind of doesn't reset, but it kind of takes certain aspects of cultural achievements that were once considered to be on a certain timeline, and it's kind of moved them around a little bit. You know, for
It
instance,
doesn't fit with the agreed upon storyline, I guess. So I mean, this is another one of those examples of, you know, where you find new data that seems, and it sort of rewrites what you thought the story was. And also, just in a related thing, I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but Gobekli Tepe has a really fantastic Instagram page that I've started following, and they really put up a lot of great artwork. I mean, there's pictures of the site that you're not seeing everywhere else.
I had no
Yeah.
idea. Go ahead, Jason.
Oh no, I was just going to say, you know, that's the beauty of that, and that's a good thing to do, because there's a ton of archaeological sites, and as a matter of fact, the ones that we saw on this last trip, Okmulgee, Moundville, all these different ones, Etowah, they all have Instagram pages and things like that as well. So you can follow these groups and find out when they have special events going on. You can get special tickets to things that you wouldn't normally know about. So again, if you're interested in this local archaeology or things that's within driving distance of your home, follow them on social media, because they have all sorts of festivals, there's holiday events, things you can take your children to, but get involved with them, make them part of your family traditions of your yearly trips and things like that. It's all great stuff. It's family friendly, and it's usually very cheap and affordable. So yeah, by all means, follow these archaeological sites. They desperately need people to come see them. They need people to know about them. They need, you know, sales in the gift shop, things like that. So if you can support them as much as you can, get out there and see them. And I think you'll honestly be surprised at the level of innovation and engineering and technology that occurred right here in North America. So please get out there and support them as much as you possibly can.
Absolutely. And again, in terms of getting out there, that's something that we've been doing an awful lot. I'd mentioned going up to the Ohio River Valley, seeing some of the sites that were famously mapped and written about by Squire and Davis, going all the way back to the 19th century. But more recently, we have visited several of the southeastern Mississippian mound sites. You mentioned Okmulgee. Again, we've talked about Etowah and a lot of these on the podcast over the years. But what I wanted to say about that trip was that as magical as the first time that we all went out on the road together and saw these ancient wonders of North America, as majestic as all that was, this last trip with the hurricane and you know, travel plans getting messed up and losing money and you know, questionable hotels and places, I loved it. To me, it had all the aspects of a perfect trip. And I was telling you guys that on the way. Jason, I know I told you personally after we got back.
Yeah.
They were just, I mean, right down to you and I sitting in a Buffalo Wild Wings at 11 o'clock, so hungry after being on the road for like 6 hours. Neither of us are talking. We've got our Guinness, we've got our chicken. It's quiet time, but man, I just loved the hell out of it. It was a lot of fun. And, you know, there's nothing better than getting out there and realizing that there are things in your state, in your community, that you may not have even known about, that provide you a window to a new way of thinking about yourself and human history, the past, our role, the impact that humans have on our environment. All these questions come to mind. And like Dr. Daniel calling in, you know, and talking about the importance of popularization of these ideas to the public, that's one thing that we always try to drive home. Look, we can go out there. Jason can go and he can interview Dr. Daniel, or he can arrange a trip, and James and I, we can meet and we can all drive out together. We can go to these sites, but to tell you guys about it on the podcast, that's something we try to do, but it's not going to be like going to those sites. We implore you to go and visit these places yourself, have that experience. You'll see what we're talking about, and you may come away with it with a different perspective on life in general.
Well, I'm sorry, man. I didn't mean to step on you there.
Unforgivable.
Unforgivable. Yeah, unforgivable. I'm sorry. But even with all of the eloquence of Micah Hanks, it's not possible to convey how impressive these sites are. And, you know, like when we went to Ohio, when we went to Mound City, that was not something that I had seen before. And there's really not words. I mean, words for the profoundness of some of this stuff. And it's better just to get out there and see these things. I mean, it's really fantastic. And some of this stuff literally is in your backyard.
Absolutely. You know, we're actually, believe it or not, picking up a few new listeners. And so for those of you who are joining us around the continental United States and elsewhere around the globe. Welcome. It is the Seven Ages Research Associates, our 2018 wrap-up program. I want to remind you that if you're listening, but you have a question or you have an idea or something that you'd like to share, you can join us, and here are the ways you can do that. You can dial us by phone at 1-828-398-4886. You can also text us at 1-828-367-7201. You can tweet at us, and that is going to be at 7Ages Research. And you can also email us at info@7ages.org. And let's introduce one more way, because there may be some people out there who would like to call in, but they don't want to be on the air. But if you'd like to leave us a voicemail, we'll allow you to do that too. And you can do that at 1-828-367-7201, the same number we're using for texts. That's going to be a Google Voice number that we have an account set up specially for this. When you hear my dulcet tones welcoming you when you call that number, and just leave a voicemail, and we can get to you that way also. So we will try to field as many questions or calls as we can if you guys are interested, or if you have those. We also have some audio files that we're going to be playing here in just a moment. I definitely want to get to one which features a conversation with a true friend of the program, and also one of the most contentious subjects for which there was a significant scientific, how do I want to term this? I want to pick my words very carefully here. There was a significant scientific development. I know that's a little non-committal, but that's the one I'm going to go with here. Because, yes, this has to do with the younger Dryas. We started to talk about that a little later, and I do want to get into some discussion about that before we get to that audio. Because, James, when we lost Jason earlier, something we started talking about, and this is somebody, a couple of guys that I think that we really have to kind of showcase here. We had the pleasure of talking with Dr. Randy Daniel earlier, and we mentioned Chris Moore, and we've also brought up Dr. Al Goodyear. And some of the stuff that these guys are doing right now, I think often people look at the discussion of history and archaeology as being, well, always looking at the past. There's a very cutting edge aspect to this. And people may not know who we're talking about necessarily if we name a scientist, by name here or there, but you'll definitely have heard probably in the news about a platinum anomaly. And last year there was a very significant scientific paper. Actually, it may have been going back a couple of years, but it appeared in the journal Nature, and it was talking about basically a rare earth element and a wide dispersal of that in an area of geological strata, not only found at various dig sites, archaeological sites here in North America, but also found in ice core data from the Greenland ice sheet, among other places. What does all that mean? Let's break this down to plain speak. What we're talking about is we're talking about evidence for an extraterrestrial impact, a possible extraterrestrial impact that may have occurred in Paleo-Indian times around 12,800 years ago. Now, that is a very controversial idea, and although I think it's gaining some traction, it's not necessarily something that mainstream science is taking seriously or endorsing. Although very slowly there are more and more accredited scientists who are kind of looking at this idea and saying, well, archaeologically, historically, paleontologically, and climatologically, I mean, it really has relevance, and we really need to understand if there's even a possibility that there was some sort of an extraterrestrial impact. We need to look at this. Now, the Platinum Anomaly Research paper that appeared in Nature not only was, to me personally, a landmark, and even though it doesn't have to do with a paper that was published in 2018, it's still a study that is having, we're seeing the ripple effect, and we're still seeing the effects of that in this year, and I'm sure next year we will too. But the lead author on that paper was Dr. Chris Moore, who we've had the pleasure of working with in the field a little on some digs, and of course we've had him on the program as a guest. And I can't thank him enough for being a scientist who's willing to look at a controversial idea but apply science to it, go through the peer review process, be critical minded and skeptical, always cautious, but proceed with that kind of open-minded approach that is truly what moves science forward.
Yeah, certainly. And for the folks that are not necessarily familiar with the younger Dryas hypothesis, I guess in a nutshell is about roughly, I'm just going to put it in whole numbers, 13,000 years ago, as we were coming out of the last ice age, there was something very unusual that happened to the planet, and it affected a lot of things. It affected the people and the fauna and the flora of North America, and there was a lot of very unusual effects as far as climate is concerned. So over time, data and information has been gathered to lean towards some catastrophic happenings around that time that had to do with maybe meteor or comet impacts, and that's what we're talking about when we say extraterrestrial impact, and how those things may or may not have affected the environment. So the crater that we talked about earlier, did we talk about that already? So not in depth. We're getting to it. So anyway, so there's some new information that has come to light in the last couple of months.
Is that a quote from The Big Lebowski? No, never mind.
New things have come to light, dude.
That's a paraphrasing of it. Right?
I cleaned that up a little bit, yeah. So as the data comes in, and especially when we're talking about historical data or geological data, the money's really made in the interpretation of said data. So as these things come in, there more and more things are beginning to support certain hypotheses. When in relation to this particular time.
Absolutely. That is perfectly on point. And Jason, I want to get your perspectives too before we get to some audio. But again, there are scientific achievements that are bringing things to light, which are moving the conversation forward. And that doesn't mean that, we've proved that there was an impact. It doesn't mean that every scientist out there who's ever looked at this skeptically has to jump on this bandwagon and now say, now we think that it's an impact too. And again, seeing the scientific process at work, this subject, the Younger Dryas, its possible cause and effects. I mean, this is maybe one of the most striking examples of science at work in our time, to me personally. And to be able to correspond with and work with some of the scientists who are involved in this research is truly not only a blessing, but I think it is, once again, the spice of life for me personally. Jason, what are your thoughts?
Well, no, it's one of those things that I think that we are very fortunate to be a part of, in that we're here to witness it. We're here to see the beginnings of the science that's going to move this conversation forward. And, one thing about this particular impact hypothesis that is really the key to my obsession about it is simply the human impact. That's really what I'm interested in. The science side of it, working in the field of environmental science, I find extremely interesting as well. Although, my focus has been marine environmental science for the most part, but nonetheless very interesting. But it's the impact on the human. So the Clovis people, how did it affect their lives? How did it affect the indigenous people of North America at that time? And it's that human story of adaptation and being able to overcome something so drastic. If indeed we do find that is what took place 13,000 years ago, it's a story of human adaptation and success and the ability to move forward through the harshest conditions. So that part of the science, what was the effect? To what degree did it affect North America? How did it affect the people and the cultures and the groupings of people and where they were at in the country at the time? That's the part that I really want to tell, because to me, it's that story of success that, even through the most adverse conditions, we as a species, we as the human beings can move forward and still thrive. And to me, that's my focus. That's what I'm really interested in. But I need the science to be able to prove it or disprove it or support it strong enough so that we can get an accurate picture of exactly what happened at that time period.
Right. Yeah. To me, it's less to do with proving something. Again, that's not how science works. And of course, that's not what you said. I'm just pointing out that science, it is important to keep in mind the idea of you disprove your hypothesis. It's the test for falsehood. And so seeing science at work, I think often people get lost in the idea that, we've got to try and, prove our point. We've got to try and bring everybody to our argument. Well, scientists kind of work the opposite way. They may have a great idea, but for a scientist, you have to be able to also not take your idea too seriously or become married to it.
Yeah.
And falsification is part of the scientific process. Nonetheless, something that I think that you do see from time to time are scientists who become so attached to certain theories that they're unwilling to do two things: entertain certain hypotheses, which may contradict an existing interpretation or hypothesis, or they are also attached to their hypothesis enough that they are unwilling to attempt to falsify their own that they're attached to. And
that's right.
These are things that, again, it's not a critique of the scientific establishment or anything. I mean, we've got a lot of good friends associated with the work that we do, who I consider very, very, I don't know what the term would be, but I mean, they are the best scientists in their field. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's not something that is meant as an attack against science by any means. I think that it is something that is intended to embolden scientists and to support their work through understanding of how the scientific process works and appreciation for those scientists who are critically minded and who are trying their best to be unbiased, not become beholden to aims and objectives that fall outside of scientific methodology, and again, essentially becoming beholden to sacred cows. As soon as you give yourself to something and you're unwilling to be skeptical of yourself and imply those same checks and balances to your own work, that's where you start losing it. And again, this is a period, guys. I think we're going to look back in a few years and see this as a time where, there were a lot of unique factors coming to fruition. And to see it in the moment, again, we think historically on this show and in our work. And so it's easy to look at the past and say, well, this happened on this date, this happened on this date, and we can read it on a printed page and we can look at it and synthesize it. To be experiencing it in real time, it's a very different experience.
Yeah, that's
absolutely. And just one more thing I want to say before we get to the soundbite is one thing I try to do working in the field of science, working in the field of archaeology, is when I have an idea, when I have a thought, I have a theory, whatever it may be, I attack my own biases. And what I mean by that is I never try to say something is this or it is that, because we know that science is constantly changing and it's constantly updating. It's like hitting the refresh button every couple of years or sometimes every year. And therefore, you cannot marry yourself to an idea so strongly that you're not willing to budge when evidence comes forward to contradict what you've thought. I don't care if you've put 20 years of research into that and it's been your heart and soul. If there's something that comes along that definitively proves that it is incorrect, you must face it. You have to deal with it. So I try to never get too attached to any one particular theory, any one particular set of ideas. I try to have the attitude of, I will go with what the data shows me.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's a hard thing to do. It's hard to swallow your pride. It's hard to think that years of research and reading could have possibly been for nothing, or at a minimum, didn't come out to the conclusion that your bias thought it should be. So just staying open-minded about the information, taking it for what it is, and then doing your very best to synthesize it. But you cannot bend something to meet what you want it to be.
Absolutely.
Well said. Yeah, that's good. So I just want to add one small thing to that, and something that a very sage professor of geology told me once was that human beings, and this is a true thing, as human beings, we like to put things in neat packages and put it in a special box in the shelf where it goes, each little thing. But the natural world does not lend itself to that. So that's one of those things as human beings, we have to recognize in ourselves that, sometimes things are not like we would like them to be.
That's absolutely right. Some things, again, they defy human expectations. And that's part of the problem with science, is to try, again, a great example is the search for alien life. And for the longest time, if you look at the philosophical developments throughout the last several centuries in terms of the human concept of, wait, hold on. So we live on a round planet. Hold on, wait. So the sun, the universe doesn't encircle us. You mean we're actually in orbit around the solar body that's visible in the sky? Oh, hold on, wait. So you mean to tell me that this is like something, that there's something out there, we're going to call that space for lack of a better term, and that our planet is a finite mass that is encircling a star somewhere out in the middle of that space? Oh, you mean so there could be other planets, for lack of a better term, that's what we're going to call ours, our Earth. There are other Earths out there. Well, if there are other Earths, then could there be other people on those Earths? Oh my gosh. Well, of course, theologically, that conversation was interesting because people couldn't conceive of it outside of the idea of, well, God created earth, God created man in his image, and therefore it was no question as to what forms other earthlings on other earths would take. But as we get to the end of the 19th century and move on into the 20th, and in part, I have to actually give credence to the science fiction writers as well as scientific thinkers. But Charles Darwin's the guy who really gets the grade A on this one because it was his analysis and his perspectives. Again, one of the greatest avocationalists of all time, in my opinion. But Charles Darwin's work set a new precedent, and it was after the publication of On the Origin of the Species that you start seeing science fiction and scientists who were writing about the idea of other inhabited worlds, and all of a sudden the question becomes not what are people like on other planets, the question becomes what is life like on other planets if said life exists.
Yeah.
And you see the progression of the thought and the evolution of the idea, and all of a sudden you begin, and look right behind me here, the famous radio play,
Yeah.
War of the Worlds.
Right.
H.G. Wells, he was one of the very first who in literature actually presented a non-anthropomorphic alien being. Now, what does this all have to do with the conversation that we're having right now? Again, it is the idea of human expectation and how with limited data sets, your expectation, it seems absurd by today's standards, and even looking back at some vintage science fiction, but if you go far enough back, it would have seemed absurd to think of life on another planet as being anything apart from people made in God's image. Now, of course, we have a radically different idea about what life might be like elsewhere out there as we're sending probes to the edges of our galaxy and beyond the infinite, as Clark so eloquently put it in 2001: A Space Odyssey. And so when we think about these developments and the changes over time, we have to recommend to ourselves as we progress that we unthink our old ideas from time to time, and we need to give up some of our old expectations so that we can make way for new and innovative thought.
Yeah. Sometimes you got to embrace those new ideas.
You absolutely do. Okay, let's get to an audio soundbite here because I guess we're kind of getting close to wrapping things up, and we started a little late, so we'll run a little late too. We have a good friend who's been on the program a few times. He's an avocationalist like us as well, and also someone who's been involved in politics. And, of course, he has a website that's devoted to much of this sort of discussion. Our friend, of course, is George Howard. And George, I appreciate George for a number of reasons. His enthusiasm, his friendship to us. He's always been a good guy. And, Jason, you've had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with George. I've met him on one occasion for dinner here in Asheville, North Carolina, and I've had the pleasure of being able to talk to him and correspond, ever since then and a little before. Something that George brings to the table, though, is kind of a unique synthesis as it relates to this Younger Dryas thing, because with all the scientists that are working, and there is actually a loosely connected group of scientists that are working together somewhat in tandem called the Comet Research Group. But I have to say that in terms of trying to get the ideas of the research of certain members of the scientific community out to the public, before there was Seven Ages, there was Cosmic Tusk and George Howard. And George was working very diligently at trying to popularize the research of people who were working, at that time it was considered somewhat against the grain. And today I got a chance to talk with George. He couldn't be here live for the program tonight because he had a very special dinner that he and his family were going to. But I want to feature a little audio from that conversation with George today because, of course, we talk about one of the biggest discoveries of 2018. We haven't really gotten into it yet. We've touched on it, and that is, of course, a possible impact feature that was discovered in Greenland ice, which is known as the Hiawatha ice sheet, as it's now being called, the Hiawatha Impact Crater. Now, this was discovered by a Danish team of researchers who were utilizing publicly accessible data obtained by NASA. And perhaps the most remarkable thing about this discovery is not only that so many science publications have noted that this was such a pivotal turning point and such an important discovery of 2018, but it seems to have, if not completely fundamentally changed the paradigm, so to speak, which is what I think all aspiring scientists really want to do in one form or another. Something that it's absolutely done is it has now kind of changed the way that the discussion is going. And while there are going to be people who are going to say, look, we have nothing, no love for the impact hypothesis. We don't need that to explain the Younger Dryas. you might say that there are a new breed of scientists, critically minded thinkers who are looking at the new data forthcoming and going, but what if? And we have to look at what the science actually says about this. So George, not a professional scientist himself, but you might say a science popularizer like we aspire to be, he and I caught up today and we talked a little about this Science Advances article, which discussed the Hiawatha impact feature. And we'll feature a little of that audio now here on the 7 Ages 2018 live year-end wrap-up. And now joining us live via someplace out there, one of my favorite people, George Howard. Merry Christmas. How you doing, my man?
Merry Christmas, Micah Hanks. Thanks for inviting me onto the 7 Ages podcast.
Well, absolutely. It's always good to have you here in our company in the Crosstime Pub. Hey, 2018 has been a wonderful year for scientific advancements and discoveries. What were some of your favorite highlights? I know you got plenty of them.
Well, I'd say there's a clear winner and an outstanding discovery that, rises above all of them this year for me, and that was the discovery by NASA and Danish team of the Hiawatha crater in Greenland, a very, very young crater that may indeed date to the time that my research has been concerned with for 20 years.
Oh, yeah. That was a huge study. And, you and I, we had dinner, full disclosure, everybody. You and I had dinner here in Asheville a few months ago, and we had been talking with friends in the scientific community who had some awareness of that. And so I know for guys like you and I, we were kind of holding our breath, waiting to see what the news would be like when it came out. And although it was met with the typical controversy that this subject, anything having to do with the Younger Dryas and the insinuation of an impact, it's always met with some controversy. But nonetheless, to see the scientific work mounting, which is at very least kind of stirring the pot, that excites me and it interests me to no end.
Yeah, I tell you what, I would feel that the controversy has been dialed down a little bit, Micah, in the sense that if you go look, interesting piece just the last 48 hours, Science magazine itself, the largest scientific publication in the world, named the Hiawatha crater discovery the runner-up breakthrough of the year, actually the number 2 to their number 1 breakthrough.
Well, I didn't see that.
And yeah, it sure did appear just in the last 48 hours or so. But then they also included in the good blurb, with those kinds of things, they never have a full article, but obviously they've done 2 very large articles just in the last month revealing the discovery. So when they summed it up as the runner-up breakthrough of the year, they brought the Younger Dryas hypothesis right into the description of the state of the science, and were very fair with it. Very fair. And then the 2 articles that were published in November that anybody can find on the web, type Science and Greenland Crater, the 2 original articles, I thought those were very fair.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want somebody to jump up and down and say, this is what I believe. All I want is for any credible study to be given a fair shake. And as you know, my perspective on this, George, is that I kind of remain in the undecided camp, and I will until we have a conclusive, irrefutable case to be made one way or another. But for that study, again, I am fascinated by the fact that there are some people, and I'm not attacking people with different ideas, I'm merely saying that they won't even have it. And I will refer to a certain Twitter thread that I saw you involved with, where one of the proponents of the consensus model, which is that we don't need any impact to explain the Younger Dryas, they had essentially said, look, this has been debunked time and time again. We don't need, more studies. And I'm thinking, so in other words, with forthcoming evidence to the contrary, you will deny that because you say it's already been debunked. I mean, are we really seeing people turn their face away from new science that may change an old paradigm?
I think we are, and I think we're seeing playing out in real time, Thomas Kuhn's well-defined paradigm changes in science, and that people go through, stages of denial and antagonism to new ideas just based on their faithfulness in the former paradigm. So when you're seeing big evidence come out like this, it puts a lot of people in a very, very uncomfortable position. But I think that's the way knowledge comes forth, and it's been expected and defined to be that way by a number of science philosophers. So we're seeing it happen in real time, and those folks who aren't willing to look at clear evidence published in the world's major science journal implying that it was an extraordinarily recent impact, they put the outer bound on 3 million years, but then clearly said it could have happened 12,000 years ago. And I think inferred through the evidence and their words and some of their communication since that it's likely less than 100,000 years ago. And they don't have any ice beneath it from their own studies of ice older than 13,000 years. They've said that.
Yeah.
So this is great evidence, and it's going to take the skeptics that you could have a recent impact and again put them in a very uncomfortable position. That's not why we're doing this. We're not advocating these ideas in order to put people in uncomfortable positions.
Yeah.
But it does signal progress.
Absolutely.
The more uncomfortable they become, the more comfortable I become, frankly.
Listen, there's nothing about science and advancement that is particularly comfortable because, again, what it constantly requires is for us to reshape things that we think we know and attitudes that we have had about the nature of the world around us and the universe. This has been a process of science since we have come out of the era of philosophy and into the realm of the natural sciences, and to me, again, it's a beautiful process. And it's, again, I think you and I are both of like mind in saying that we're not trying to tell everybody you have to either think this or that, but we enjoy watching the scientific process unfold. And speaking of that, by the way, now I haven't had a chance to look at this new study, but you brought to my attention this morning. You emailed Jason and I, and you were talking about something you have posted over at the Cosmic Tusk in relation to the Saginaw Bay. Is that correct?
Yeah, something I've reposted from elsewhere. It was a scientific paper that apparently just came out this week. It didn't even have a date on it. It had an Impress logo on it. So I imagine it's coming out this week or next. But it absolutely floored me this morning. Be happy to talk about it.
Yeah, let's hear about it.
And yeah, it has a little background. It kind of reaches back to some of the Carolina Bay discussion, which we've gone on at some length. And I think that to a degree these days I'm an agnostic, and it's about to drag me back into the firm extraterrestrial camp because the and get myself in trouble. But I've always been at the simultaneous causation camp, where I believe they all happened at once. It's whether it came from space or not. And one of the longtime proponents and probably the lead thinker in that regard these days, Michael Davies, has been making claims that are in keeping with the paper that came out this week. And the paper that came out this week was a group of Czech scientists, obviously very, very highly trained professionals in their fields, and which was mostly gravity anomalies and looking at gravitational data, which apparently, from reading the paper, is getting very, very sophisticated. And there are even new ways to crunch that data and acquire that data that have never even been used on some parts of the earth. And they turned that to a particular part of Michigan called Saginaw Bay, which is easily Googleable. And it's a very distinct feature that forms the thumb of the state of Michigan when it's thought of as a glove.
Mm-hmm.
So the thumb is formed by virtue of a kind of an anomalous bay, which reaches out off of Lake Huron back about, I don't know, maybe 40, 50 miles, maybe that far, and is circular at the end of it. Okay. Over the last 10 years, this gentleman, Michael Davies, who's a little bit of a pajama scientist like myself, but by gosh, has done a lot more number crunching, has taken the characteristics of every single Carolina Bay and pointed them back to their source of origin and backed out the turn of the earth and the lost distance and very sophisticated, ballistic equations.
Mm-hmm.
And has been claiming for 10 years that it all comes from Saginaw Bay. So then when you get a major paper coming out in a journal of the proper discipline, actually it was the Journal of Great Lakes Research, which I imagine is probably fairly conservative in their views of the Great Lakes,
Mm-hmm.
And this is a revolutionary idea that managed to get published there. They find gravity anomalies around Saginaw Bay that are in keeping with other major impacts around the world that they have studied using that same equipment.
Interesting.
Yeah, and you've got to read it kind of carefully and give it a couple of looks because they're speaking their own language. But I find that impressive because this was not just some narrative speculation. This was all data-driven. And what they find there are gravity anomalies they call coned. And you'll kind of have to look at it. It's hard to explain. But when you see these things all pointing the same direction as if they were combed with a comb, they find that very unusual. And they find a connection, a very strong connection and correlation of that with impact craters.
That's George Howard right there. And, of course, we'll feature the complete interview with him on our complete podcast, which will be featured there at 7ages.org. George is such a wonderful guy. I wish he could have been here for the live conversation because I know that there's so much stuff that all you guys would love to contribute in terms of that conversation with him. And I told him, I actually opened the talk by saying one of my favorite people, but that's true. I mean, George is a great guy. And when he came up here to Asheville, he and I took him to the Twisted Laurel, a wonderful Italian restaurant here in town, and we hung out for hours. We talked about everything. And so he said hello to both of you guys. And, kind of like Dr. Daniel and others, he had just said, I appreciate the work that you guys do. And at this time, it's not, like something you got to get evangelical about. But I mean, at this time, I think that there's just a lot of important discoveries. And to try and apply science to them in a measured, skeptical, and very ultimately careful way, but also to try and bring these perspectives to the public in a way that is digestible and interesting to them. It's a fine balance. We're walking the tightrope, but we're trying our best to do that here, I think, guys. And in 2018 has been a great. Dang it! I got to remember to pot that thing down when we're getting our call. But 2018 has been a wonderful year for that, I think, for the Seven Ages team.
Yeah, you know what? I agree with that, and I've got an old saying that, and you guys heard me say this, I'd rather be lucky than good. So I think that we're lucky in a lot of ways that we're working on this project at this particular time where there's some really exciting things that are being worked on right now, and some really exciting information that has come to light it's bared fruit from some people not associated with us necessarily, but through their efforts. We're kind of reaping the benefits of that in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. James, I think there's somebody from your neck of the woods that's calling into the program. 912, that would be a Savannah area code. You're on with us live. Good evening.
Hey, guys. This is Chris with the Dabbler's Den. How are you?
Hey, Chris. How you doing, my man?
I'm good. It's good to hear from you guys. We've been growing together for the past year, so I kind of feel like it's my anniversary too. So,
Jason, did you hear that? Yeah.
Right on, man. Right on. And yeah, Chris Cottrell from Dabbler's Den. So find him over there on YouTube. He does some great work, and his a lot of his research has paralleled ours. And man, it's great to hear from you. Thanks for calling in, brother.
Yeah. When I heard the news from George Howard just a second ago, I knew I had to call in for sure. I haven't heard that yet, and the whole Saginaw Bay and the Carolina Bays. That's very exciting news. So I'm super excited.
We'll have some more information, of course, on the forthcoming podcast, because we've got lengthier renditions. We played about half of each of these interviews, but of course, Dr. Daniel gave us a good 20 minutes. So did George. And now, of course, we get to speak with you, but you're here with us live. And so, Chris, tell us about what you've been doing here in 2018. We've been keeping up with your YouTube, of course, but what are your perspectives on things? This is really exciting, being the first chance we have to actually talk with you.
Yeah. Well, the Carolina Bays, this is something that's fascinated me for a really long time, really for a couple decades now. And, I really think that when I first started to research these things, I was looking up George Howard's website. That's how long ago it was.
Yeah.
And, but they've been really fascinating to me. And, all this stuff coming along now with the Younger Dryas impact and all that, I really kind of just felt the need to put it out there. So I already had the YouTube channel. The YouTube channel had nothing to do with Carolina Bays, had nothing to do with Younger Dryas impacts or anything like that. But I felt I had the platform. I felt like I needed to put this stuff out there. I'm an educator. I've been teaching for 17, 18 years now, and one of the things I really kind of pride myself in is being able to try to present something and grab the attention of people that may not necessarily want their attention grabbed. Like I said, as a high school teacher, that's something I deal with every day. So I really felt that being able to present a lot of the information that is coming from people like Antonio Zamora, who I really think has a lot of this nailed down. I've gone through the data, I've gone through, the papers, and I have a really hard time going along with what the scientific explanation is for Carolina Bays. I really do feel like they're related to these impacts, and over the past couple months, we've really seen that this could be a reality. And like I said, with the paper that you just mentioned with George, that really, like I said, really is a cause for excitement.
Chris, something that George and I talked about was, and what I love about George is that George has been a proponent that, like you have advocated, that there is a impact feature, that there's something related to impacts with the Carolina Bays. Now, our colleague, Dr. Chris Moore, of course, has a different perspective. And what interestingly, what George Howard and I kind of got into was, and I love this. I appreciate this about George because he'll always say, I don't want to get bogged down with that because, the Carolina Bays are kind of the caboose on the train of the whole Younger Dryas thing.
The kooky caboose, that's what he calls them. That's right.
Yeah, and he said, he said, I've often been the person who's the most associated with that. And he said, I don't really like to talk about them because he says, I think that the debate over the processes that lead to the formation of the bays could potentially distract us from the broader understanding of the Younger Dryas, which that is a really respectable thing to say. And that's what I love about George. George does not give himself to hypotheses. I mean, he may be a champion. He calls himself, at times a knight. He's out there, he's fighting for it. But he said, by the same token, he said, I understand that for science to advance, we can't get hung up on pet theories. And so he said, I may have my opinion, but he said, I prefer not to talk about that in the betterment, with the attitude of a betterment of the broader subject and a better understanding of it. Now, that said, one of the things we put on the table was that, well, could it possibly be that, the Carolina Bays are one kind of a feature, but something like Saginaw Bay could be something else entirely. And it could be that there are some distinctive characteristics that are similar, but that may be respective to different phenomena, if that makes sense. Some things may look like craters, others may not be craters, but they may nonetheless resemble one.
Right. Yeah.
Well, sorry, Chris. But one of the things that I was thinking of, I was talking about this earlier about how we like to put things in nice boxes is, in a way we're kind of, in some ways especially with the Carolina Bays, it's either this or that, right? It's a black and white type of a deal when, we're sort of limiting ourselves by thinking that way. There might be a combination of processes that, have brought these things to be as they appear to be today. So, and there may be new information that comes out, tomorrow or next year or 5 years from now that, completely changes our thinking on that. So I guess where I'm going with this is, I just want to remind folks to be open-minded and be cautious of really going all in on something that's, not necessarily, we know everything there is to know about.
Absolutely. Oh, but Chris, I want to thank you, though. You did mention another great researcher who has done a lot to contribute to this, as you have done, and that's Anthony Zamora, who, of course, published a very interesting paper in geomorphology. Was that this year or was it last year? I lose track of these
2017.
things. Okay, so it was last year. Yeah, I tell you, we've got another year behind us. Where do they keep going?
Yeah, and he really did a good job. He's gone by the book. He's just like us. He doesn't have a PhD. But he retired and he's focused all of his energy on these Carolina Bays. And in a way, that's respectable. And nowadays, when we have just as much information as a lot of the PhDs that worked on this stuff back in the day, we have more information in the palm of our hands than they had, in the libraries, at the time. So, really for somebody like Antonio Zamora who can really just put all his time and energy into it, he's worked out the mathematics behind it. I just really, going through all the explanations that to me just really fit. And, now, unfortunately, Antonio Zamora isn't one of the, he'll put together 45-minute videos and the information is wonderful, but the presentation needs some work. And again, that was one of the things that I really felt like I could help. And so I kind of took it upon myself to do that. And I hope it's been, received. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've been kind enough to, mention us in some of your videos too. And so on behalf of Jason and James, and I definitely want to thank you for that, as we're all trying to promote just generally critical thinking and awareness of these subjects. I don't think that anybody is trying to say, no, you can't be right. You have to take everything from my perspective or whatever. Jason, do you remember, for instance, the time we were on the telephone, we had this conversation. We were kind of like, I remember standing out on my porch and I was thinking, what do we do with all this Younger Dryas stuff? And you kind of asked me, you said, okay, I need to know at this point, what do you think it is? I mean, and we kind of both walked away from that conversation going, I don't know. I mean, but that's kind of what's beautiful, is that we are at a point where we seem to be having to ask questions, and it's sort of a turning point, isn't it, Jason?
No, it absolutely is. It's one of those critical things where you're kind of, you fill up your mind with so much information. You look at all the possibilities, and again, we're talking about this impact, the Younger Dryas, and the discovery of this new crater, and all of these things in the Carolina Bays, and it's kind of this picture overall. But then again, me, I'm always going back to the people, the humans, and so we would have on top of that huge discussion of scientifically what happened, environmentally what happened. We also throw on there, but what about the people? So if this happened environmentally, what did that mean for human beings in North America? What did that mean for Pleistocene fauna, megafauna, and all the things that were here? What was the impact there? So, just trying to paint this picture of to what degree was the impact? How did it affect things? The movement of the water off the ice sheets and into the Gulf Stream, and all these things. How did that come together, and what did it mean? And how do you make it through something that severe? And so, that's when you stop and you think about all that, it kind of gets overwhelming sometime. And I'm sitting there holding a redstone point in one hand and a Clovis point in the other, and you have to ask that question. What changed between here and here? What was the world like? What was the impact like? And for me, I always like to do this. I take it from the science, and I take it from the umbrella conversation, and I really like to get down to the human experience, the one-on-one. So I think about things like families and fathers and mothers with their children, and food sources disappearing, and the environment changing, and the sea changing, and the lakes and rivers, and all the impacts that are potentially a result of this impact. And it's just, it boggles the imagination. And so, when I'm trying to get that story in my head, it's all of these things that you consider. And then Micah and I would talk for hours about this. I'm talking 3, 4, 5 hour phone calls. And then at the end we go, what does it all mean?
Exactly. Yep. That was exactly. And it's not just one phone call, by the way, folks. Jason and I have had
countless.
Yeah, I couldn't count on two hands. Chris, maybe I hope we can get you in on some of those calls too, because again, as Jason has reiterated throughout the evening, it's the 7 Ages Research Associates and the people that we work with, and avocationalists like yourselves. Of course, being actually a teacher, though, you are an educator, and so actually on that point, I want to come back over to that. As an educator, what do you see the role of the avocationalist in relation to this conversation, and what have you learned, and what are you trying to convey as an educator in your understanding of this subject?
Well, I've taken my kids along. They always see the videos before I put them out on YouTube. They're kind of my guinea pigs before I put the information out there. And I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think that this is where all the arrows line up. And so I think it's important for my students to see that the information that's there, it's there for everybody to be able to get and use. And sometimes it just takes, a couple people to get together and put that information in in the order that it needs to be put in, and kind of open some eyes. So I hope that that's what my students get out of it.
That's what we would all hope that we would get out of it, right?
Yeah.
But as an educator, there's two sides of this. There is what you hope to teach and inspire in those that you are teaching, and then there is what you learn as an educator along the way, which reminds me of that age-old expression that there's more to travel than the destination. And part of the adventure is the journey getting there. I have to remind myself of that every single day when I get up every single morning, whether it's sun or whether it's rain, whether it's a good day or a bad day, whether I'm really busy or I've got a day off. Do I have days off? Okay.
I don't have any days off.
The answer is no.
And sleep is a crutch.
But you know what I mean? That's the whole thing, is that we've got to be able to appreciate the journey in all its facets. Chris, what are you looking forward to in 2019, my man?
Oh man, as far as the YouTube channel, I do plan on doing some more, kind of like virtual field trips using the LiDAR, because the LiDAR is really kind of a key piece of, it's really just kind of, when you start seeing, like specifically with these Carolina Bays, when you see them underneath the LiDAR overlays on Google Earth, it just lays out the whole story in front of you. And there's just so many other things too when you start to look deeper into it. And so I plan on doing some quick 5-10 minute videos, virtual field trips, just to kind of point out some things and just kind of throw it out there. I know that, you know, like you guys mentioned earlier, there's a lot of energy and a lot of time that goes into putting together, you know, a YouTube video or a podcast like you guys do. And I'm, I do work and I have a lot of things coming up with my work. I'm actually going to be teaching a couple college level geology classes starting next fall. So I really have to prepare and plan for that.
Mm-hmm.
And but I definitely want to continue with the YouTube. I definitely want to continue with some of these Carolina Bay videos. And like I said, specifically coming up is going to be, you know, these quick virtual field trips using that LiDAR, because it really just, like I said, it explains the whole story.
Well, yeah, absolutely. We enjoy your videos. And LiDAR, like you said, is something that I think is a real game changer. In fact, I'm looking at soon, hoping to maybe line up an interview for the team and I that has to do with specifically LiDAR. I mean, we usually talk about the historical and the archaeological analysis. We, of course, speak a lot about geology because we've got a geologist on our team, but we are interested in technology. And actually, the beginning of this live show tonight kind of showed that, because we were discussing a lot of astronomy and things like this. I actually am hoping to get a LiDAR expert who I have obtained a book by, and I've been in touch with his publicist, and I want to try and line that up. So that's one of the things that Seven Ages will hope to do in 2019, is to interview a LiDAR expert and look at the way that this technology is changing the playing field. And like you're talking about, this is something that, as you put it, you know, it's changing not only the way that we see the state of the art, but also the state of the past. And that's fascinating. I mean, it's so exciting to see these technologies at our disposal. And there are some others. Dr. Moore was talking with us on the site back in March and discussing not only blood protein analysis, which helps us understand.
Yeah, it's amazing.
That's fascinating. But I mean, there are possibly other kinds of analysis that are being innovated in different parts of the world, which may tell us even more about what the stone tools from the ancient past, thousands of years old, may have been used for. Again, this is a very exciting time to be alive, isn't it?
It sure is. It sure is. Yep.
It really is. Well, I know that you and James have met, and I'm glad you guys got to catch up. And I think, Jason, you and I are next on the list. So we got to head down to visit with Brother Waldo. And Chris, I hope you'll come out and we can all meet.
Yeah,
and break some bread.
Definitely. You know, I've been speaking with Jason, you know, through social media now since I believe it was like around March. He introduced me to the channel, and it's been, you know, ever since then we've been kind of back and forth, you know, about lots of topics. And then, yeah, last week I got a chance to meet with James, and that was awesome. And, you know, and I haven't had a chance to meet with you, so it's been great to talk with you. You know, I've definitely fallen asleep to your voice many nights, months, but only to be, you know, woken up with images of like barking salamanders and, you know, cannibals and stuff. So,
well, let me just tell you,
it is great to hear from you, talk with you.
Chris, you're not the only person that's ever said they fell asleep to the sound of my voice.
The soothing sounds of Micah Hanks.
Good luck in 2019, and you know, I think this is going to be a big year for everybody. So keep at it.
Absolutely. And you do likewise, man. We appreciate our science educators out there, and you keep up the good work. And by the way, the beer is on me when we reach Savannah. Okay. Jason and I were coming down. All right.
Deal. All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Good night.
Thanks,
and
Chris.
Good luck. Great to hear from Chris. I tell you, we've had some wonderful conversations with folks tonight.
And, you know, I just want to throw out there that as we're having this conversation, I just received a message from Dr. Christopher Moore, who unfortunately was traveling back home tonight from North Carolina, was unable to take part in the discussion, but he's looking forward to downloading the podcast. So there we have it. Our associate and brother down there, Dr. Christopher Moore. So that's what I'm saying, guys. You know, we're getting out there, we're reaching things. And one thing I want to kind of throw out to the listeners real quick before we kind of, you know, get to the end here is, you know, over this past year, we've talked about a lot of different things. So I would like to get a little bit of feedback from some of the listeners. One thing that we've discussed, and I would like to see if you guys have an interest in this, is possibly doing some lectures, different live events where we could rent a small venue, have some people come out We could all do a presentation, have some guests, such as many of the people that we've spoken about and people who've called in tonight, as well as other guests. If you're interested in that, if you think you would be interested in going to a live event featuring the 7 Ages Research Associates and all of our various forms, shoot us a line, shoot us a message. Just let us know if that's something that you would be interested in taking part in, and we'll see what we can maybe make happen later in the year.
Absolutely. We've already had our sights set on one location, and I think that there's no better place, Jason, than where you are right now, Charleston, South Carolina. It has the culture, it has the history. There's so many aspects about Charleston that I think many people would appreciate, but we can always take the show on the road. But I mean, I have given lectures for years on a variety of different subjects, and as history becomes more and more my focus. In fact, actually, I've given a presentation on scientific interpretations of causal factors underlying the Younger Dryas.
Sure.
And as you know, again, I mean, I'm kind of an agnostic with the Younger Dryas. I'm not somebody who's all in on an impact hypothesis. In fact, there was a time where early on I was pretty much convinced that all features of the Dryas could be explained without an impact because of the fact that there are similar Dryas-like occurrences that have occurred as we were leaving other previous ice ages.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of proxy data that shows that.
I mean, that's really important. That's a good point. It's important to remain agnostic about things, especially like this. Before we really get the really final answer in, if we ever do. So, and I think that's important for people to remember. Just in kind of a general sense, especially when dealing with with emerging theories about the natural world. So I like to be agnostic. I can be convinced one way or the other. I don't want to get married to an idea about something necessarily. However, I think if you're going to get married to anything when it comes to science, is just get married to the process. Try to don't camp out and necessarily in one camp unless we're going to talk about gravity. I mean,
but gravity, that's a whole other conversation we can have.
we know what the effects of gravity are pretty well, on this rock in space. So
yeah, we do. And
we do not understand gravity from a causal standpoint. So I don't want to open a can of worms there, but let's just be agnostic about gravity as well. So,
well, let me just put it this way. I want to paraphrase Hawking as we're kind of nearing the end here. Hawking was asked at various times, his idea about cosmology, whether there was a God, creation of the universe, what came before the Big Bang, things like that. And of course, he had been an atheist and approached this subject from a strictly scientific one. But nonetheless, he said some very interesting things when he wrote A Brief History of Time. Of course, he concludes that book by essentially saying that once we solve this equation, this idea of a unifying principle, once we crack that nut, we will know the mind of God. And what he meant by that, of course, I don't think he was endorsing any kind of deity or any kind of theology. That's beside the point. It's interesting because, again, we have a lot of questions. In the same actual chapter of that book, I think he said that to understand what came before the Big Bang, that's not a question scientists ask. We leave that to the theologians.
Certainly.
I have my own personal feelings about what he probably meant by that. But in terms of gravity, one of the interesting things that he said was he basically said we don't need a creator or a God in a universe that we have gravity in, where gravity and the force of gravity itself and what we know gravity is capable of can achieve those things itself. Now, again, I want to leave theology out of this conversation because we're talking about the ancient past. We're talking about history, archaeology, things like that. I may not agree on all points with the late Stephen Hawking, but I'm fascinated by him, and I appreciate his perspectives. That's one of the things that he said about gravity. He said a lot of things about gravity. And for those who really appreciate science, I'll just add this too. Don't just read A Brief History of Time. And certainly don't just read A Briefer History of Time, that kind of a, shortened version that left out the entire chapter on the thermodynamic arrow of time, which I think was a travesty. If you're really interested in science, go online. If you go to MIT's YouTube page, you can actually see entire entry-level physics classes taught by Leonard Susskind and other great thinkers of our age, contemporary of Hawking. You can read Hawking's actual science papers, not just the popular writing that he so diligently contributed to our broader knowledge and the broader, I think on the social and on the cultural level, the layman's knowledge of science, Hawking contributed so greatly to that. Verse yourself on all these things. And like Dr. Randy Daniels said earlier, this is so important. He was talking about the fact that, actually we were kind of conversing a little before we got Jason back on the line, that there are the popular conceptions of science. And we're talking kind of across the board about astronomy, cosmology, physics, all kinds of things tonight. And those are really the hot button issues in popular science these days. Archaeology is nonetheless important, but it doesn't seem to be rock star science. For instance, I'll put it to you this way. Where is the Neil deGrasse Tyson or the Michio Kaku or the Bill Nye of archaeology? You might argue that we have some, and some of them have been on our show. Dr. Kara Cooney, of course, is one of them. Brilliant archaeologist and Egyptologist, and her contributions to understanding the life of Hatshepsut and other aspects of ancient Egyptian culture and their art and their mythology and cosmology. They're unprecedented. But even though she's been featured on television programs, I worry sometimes that history and archaeology are considered subjects that, looking at the past isn't going to move us forward, but we have to understand where we came from to know where we're going.
Yeah, and what we've lost in the process of getting here. And when we look at what we've lost, that is so important to the conversation because, again, are we wasting time and effort relearning what we've already known and lost in the past? So that's something that's always been interesting to me is this a lot of this just wasted effort? If, again, we've talked about this on other episodes of Seven Ages, the burning of the library at Alexandria.
Oh yeah.
Basically that set us back to year one as far as what we potentially lost there.
Yeah. So, some of this is just, the process of existing, I guess you could say. If there's some kind of a cosmic catastrophe, in relation to the earth, and it kicks human race back, 20,000 years or whatever in our learning, I don't necessarily consider that to be wasted effort, I guess, in relearning it, but it's something that it's a little bit reassuring in a way because, no matter what, how many times humanity gets knocked down and, into the dirt, nearly, extinct, we can come back and always be fruitful and relearn these things that, that may have been lost in the past.
Yeah. Well, we can always come back so far. We haven't had that defining event yet where we're erased from the record completely.
Yeah, well, it's probably at our own hand if I had to guess.
Well, let me give one to the catastrophists then, okay? Because that's something that I think is really contentious in archaeological discussions right now.
Yeah.
And really that's at the heart of the entire Younger Dryas debate. There are the scientists who are adherents to the conventional model, which says, natural climate changes that were occurring as we were exiting the Pleistocene and entering the Holocene, and as the glacial meltwater runs off into the North Atlantic and it disrupts the cycles, the thermohaline circulation is the scientific term for that, but basically just the Gulf streams out there. As this is disrupted, and as the Atlantic cools, it causes global cooling, which is most apparent in North America and parts of Europe, but again, which we have a lot of proxy data, climatological data, that shows that there were changes in temperatures all around the world. In fact, a warming spell in Antarctica around the time of the Dryas. So we have a lot of scientific data that shows that something was going on, but we need an impact to be able to explain it. And yet I look at guys like Wally Brecker. I look at guys like Dr. James Kennett, one of the most respected geologists in the field, and someone, Jason, who you and I had the pleasure of being able to talk to about this. And, really, in truth, I think it's okay to say this now in confidence, and we kept it a secret, but he talked to us personally about the study that was being carried out by the Danish scientists, which was published in Science Advances, which has been one of the most significant developments in relation to the ongoing study of causal agents underlying the Younger Dryas, in recent memory. And so to be able to share perspectives and talk with the members of the scientific community about things, and again, part of the reason that that conversation was off the books in terms of our own involvement was simply this: we respect the process of peer review.
Right.
We want for information, rather than to be politicized or to be emblazoned on the headline of a blog or some gossip podcast or something like that. What we want to see is I have to say, both of you are qualified scientists, in fields of environmental science and geology. Now, I am an avocationalist and, if anything, an autodidact. I'm mostly self-educated, although I have some college training, and I may training some time in college, and I intend to go back. You might say, training in research with regard to historical research and whatnot. And
You're a scholar and a Renaissance man.
Well, self-taught, for what it's worth, but thank you. And, people write to me all the time and say that. They're like, it doesn't matter that you don't have a formal education because you understand scientific processes. And if anything, you educate others on the necessity of that.
Yeah.
I'm humbled. I'm humbled by that. Okay. I'm humbled by that. That's all I can say, because I'm not a person with a background in science, but I read textbooks in my spare time. That's how passionate I am about this. And I want to promote the work of people like Chris Moore and Randy Daniel, Albert Goodyear, and many others. Now, that said, again, we respect the scientific community and the perspectives of the scientific community. And that's why when we talk about these things, the peer review process is all too important. Scientists may not always agree on the things that are being discussed for peer review. And you couldn't come up with a conversation subject more contentious really right now than the idea of an impact underlying the Younger Dryas hypothesis or Younger Dryas impact. So again, we're not trying to advocate that entirely, but we want to talk about whether science is going in a direction that we should ask fundamental questions about this, and indeed whether there is a paradigm shift that may occur as a result from those conversations. But it requires peer review and it requires skepticism. Those are the things that we consider values, and the 7 Ages Research Associates are always going to stand behind science at work and the scientific process in its purest form.
Certainly. Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, guys, look, we're kind of wrapping up here, and I just want to say it's been a wonderful year with the two of you. We've gotten traveling. We've done a lot of podcasts, aspirations, hopes, projections, predictions for 2019. Jason, why don't we start with you?
Well, I just like to honestly do more of the same. I would like to have an annual trip. I would like to continue, booking great guests. One of our missions and goals here is to get new voices on the show, people that you may not be that familiar with from different disciplines. So we're going to continue that process of trying to get some new and innovative, exciting guests on the show, delve into some more of the topics. Again, like I mentioned earlier, maybe reach out to a little bit more of an international community and try to grow the show. Just like I mentioned earlier, we really desperately need those rates and reviews in order to grow the show. So please, if you're listening, just take a second and do that for us. It'd be greatly appreciated. And we've met so many great people this year. I'm really excited about, who are we going to meet next? Who's the next researcher who's going to run across the 7 Ages audio journal and contact us and have some great information to share with us. So we're always looking forward to that. A couple things that I know are kind of coming up immediately here is we've started planning some new shows for the first half of the year. So I'm excited about getting those underway. And in January, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but we do have a very special, very in-depth, and I got to say it's a very powerful and very heavy show, special 2-part series coming up in January. It's going to kind of kick the gear off for the 7 Ages audio journal podcast, and it's guaranteed to make you think, and it's going to really open your eyes if you're not familiar with the topic of the North American indigenous peoples genocide.
That's right. That's a heavy subject. Looking forward to getting into it, though, because it's very important that we bring that dialogue again to a popular format like podcasting. James, what about you? 2019, my man, what's in your projections for the future? I'm looking forward to getting back out on the road with you, enjoying some fantastic Savannah cuisine, I hope.
Oh, yeah, certainly. So, good seafood and, find fine drinks to be had by all. But I think it, in some ways more the same in 2019 that for 7 ages like we did in 2018. What I mean by that is the road trips have really been, the lifeblood, or the, however you, maybe the fertilizer from which we have sprung. And we had some really great trips last year. We learned things that we did not anticipate learning, and I definitely had some, and watch the video moments. I had some moments this last year, so I think those are important for us to keep, keep doing. And in the military, in the Army, we call that a sustain. It's something that we want to keep doing. It's something that we did right, and we've met, like Jason said, we met a lot of fantastic people. We went to some really, really interesting places. We had some experiences that we could not anticipate, especially at Serpent Mound in Ohio. So yeah. So it's I think, like we said earlier, or what I said earlier, is this, this thing has turned into something that I could not have anticipated, just in my my workaday mind, I guess you could say.
Well, we're all the better for that.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
For inquiring minds that want to know, I'm not sitting here chugging diet tonic water. That's not the case. In fact, I don't even do gin and tonic very often. And obviously, I'm thinking about calories when I do. But for those who wanted to know, I have wonderful well water here in my bunker. And so I refill bottles. Who knows how long ago I purchased this, but I'll refill bottles and keep fine filtered mountain spring water at all times here in the bunker. And so I've got one of my refilled bottles, but I'm sure people are like, why is he chugging like diet tonic water? That's gross.
Diet water.
I'm not drinking diet tonic water. In fact,
yeah.
I probably bought this like a year ago, made a gin and tonic for somebody. We probably got about that far down, and then it went flat and sat in my refrigerator for several months, and I poured that out, and then I rinsed it out and refilled it with a spring water, which is what I'm drinking now. But nobody's ever going to believe that. I'm going to be the guy that's known now as the fellow who drinks diet tonic water. Anyway, well, for my own part, guys, 2019, keep on keeping on. I'm a podcaster. I made that decision about a decade ago, and this is the youngest of the siblings, the newest child, the latest addition to the family. And of all the podcasts I produce, this is in many ways the most interesting and nuanced, because there are co-hosts and there's such a diverse array of subjects, even in the confines of a broader subject like history or archaeology. In terms of those disciplines, we cover a lot of ground and we cover a lot of area. And we do that literally, too, when we go out and we travel. And so I just hope that we can continue that and enjoy the process of becoming, as the late Bruce Lee said. And, he's definitely somebody who I know has influenced a lot of us here, a lot of you guys out there. I'll always remember this letter that he wrote to a friend, and he signed off at the end, the process of becoming. And that's where I see not only the path forward in the future for humanity as being, in the broader sense of anthropological studies and our contribution to it, but it is an individual process too. It is a process of becoming that we each individually are undergoing. And so thank you to both of you guys for being a part of this and for being a part of this wonderful little endeavor that we call the 7 Ages Research Associates and the Associated Audio Journal, which we now produce. Guys, I think that brings us to the conclusion of our 2018 year-end wrap-up holiday assessment of things, the state of the situation.
Yeah. What a great time. I really enjoyed this. And, I'm still not fearful of live YouTube. So,
yeah. All things considered, I think it turned out pretty well. Hey, I'd like to say a big thank you to all of the people that subscribe to the show, all of our endeavors, YouTube. Don't forget our social media. That's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. Please rate and review. Help us get up there so we can get this information out to more folks.
That's right. Absolutely. Thanks to all the folks who called in and joined us tonight. Dr. Randy Daniel, our good friend George Howard, Chris Cottrell, all the folks out there that we've mentioned and who actually weren't calling in, but nonetheless were with us in spirit. And of course, my colleagues, James, Waldo, Jason, Pentrail, and all of you who subscribe, like Jason so eloquently put it. Thanks to all you guys. Thanks for a wonderful year. We will see you in 2019. I'm Micah Hanks, and we are together, the 7 Ages Research Associates. It is the 7 Ages Audio Journal. Until next time, next year, be well, my friends.
Are we off the air?